Hey, you made it. I'm genuinely glad you're here. Go ahead and get comfortable. Adjust your pillow. Pull that blanket up a little closer. Maybe close your eyes or let them go soft and unfocused. Whatever feels right for where you are tonight. There's no rush. There's nowhere else you need to be right now, and nothing you're supposed to be doing except exactly this. Tonight we're doing something a little different from the usual deep dives and theory breakdowns. No dramatic music drops. No jump cuts, no urgent energy, just you, the quiet, and what I genuinely think is one of the most fascinating animated shows ever put on television, The Amazing World of Gumball. And we're going to spend the next few hours exploring it. Not the darkest theories or the most unsettling implications, though some of those will naturally come up because the show is honestly riddled with them. Mostly tonight is about the details, the behind-the-scenes stories, the character quirks, the weird little production choices, the things that get overlooked, the facts that seem small on the surface but unfold into something genuinely interesting the longer you sit with them. I've been collecting Gumball facts for a long time. Not in a frantic, here are 50 things in 5 minutes way, but the slow, wandering kind of collection where something catches your eye during a rewatch, or you find an old interview from Ben Bockelay or someone on the wiki, fills in a detail you never thought to question. That's the energy we're carrying tonight. Slow and wandering. Curious and easy. So take a breath. Let your shoulders drop. And let's drift into Elmore together. We're starting from the very beginning. Not from when the show first aired, but from where the whole idea came from. Which is a story that I find genuinely beautiful and a little bit poetic when you really let it land. And before we go further, if you're listening to this right now and you want to join the community, drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. Seriously, I want to know. Are you lying in bed in some quiet apartment at midnight? Are you on a train somewhere watching city lights blur past the window? Are you in the early hours of the morning and the world outside has gone completely still? I love knowing where you all are when you find these videos. It makes Elmore feel a lot less isolated. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Consider subscribing. Every single subscriber genuinely helps this channel keep going, and I have so much more to talk about. All right, lights down, let's go. Section 1. The Rejected Characters and the Birth of a World. There's something quietly remarkable about the fact that the amazing world of Gumball exists at all, and I don't mean that in the vague, wow, what a show sense. I mean that the circumstances that created it were genuinely accidental, shaped entirely by failure. Not dramatic, career-ending failure, but the small, grinding, ordinary kind. The kind where you work hard on something and it just doesn't land. Ben Bockelay, the man who created Gumball, was born in Paris in June 1980. He grew up in a small town near Marseille in the south of France. He studied animation at the École des Métiers du Cinéma d'Animation in Angoulême, which is one of the most important animation schools in France. And after graduating, he moved to London, where he found a job at a studio called Studio AKA. Studio AKA, if you've never heard of it, is one of the most respected commercial animation studios in the United Kingdom. They're known for incredibly creative, visually unusual work, the kind of short films and advertisements that win awards and get talked about for years after the fact. For Bockelay, working there was a formative experience. He spent several years learning the industry from the inside, and part of what that job required was constantly pitching. You'd come up with characters, designs, concepts, visual worlds, and then you'd present them to clients, and most of the time the clients would say no. That's just how commercial animation works. You might pitch a character for a food commercial. You'd spend real time and real creative energy giving that character a look, a personality, a reason to exist. And then the client goes a different direction, or they want something more generic, or the campaign gets canceled and all of that work goes into a folder and collects dust. You move on to the next pitch. Bockelay did this for years. He lost most of his pitches. He said in interviews that he almost never won, which sounds discouraging but was apparently pretty normal for the industry. What made it meaningful, in retrospect, was that every rejected character still existed in his portfolio. They'd been designed. They had faces and silhouettes and rough ideas for personalities. They just had nowhere to live. Then in 2007, something changed. Cartoon Network, the American children's television network, was opening a new development studio in London. It was called Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe, and it was set up specifically to create new shows for the network from European talent. Philip Hunt, the creative director at Studio AKA, encouraged Bocquelet to apply for a position there. He got the job. And his initial role wasn't to pitch his own ideas. He was there to help other creators develop and refine their pitches for Cartoon Network. He was essentially a development consultant, someone who understood what the network was looking for and could help shape ideas into something more presentable. While doing that work, the studio announced that all employees would have the opportunity to pitch their own concepts. And that's when Bocquelet looked back at his folder of rejected characters, all those designs that never had a home, and had an idea. What if he put them all in one show? The original concept was genuinely, wonderfully strange. A show about rejected cartoon characters attending a remedial school. Not a show about quirky characters who happen to look different, but literally a show where the premise was that these characters had failed to make it in the industry and were being retrained. It was a deeply self-aware idea, and you can feel the bones of it in what Gumball eventually became. The way Elmore is full of characters who have no logical reason to coexist, the way no two of them were clearly designed for the same world. The producers at Cartoon Network thought the concept was too sad, which is fair. There's something a little bleak about centering an entire children's show around the idea of failing to be good enough. They asked Bocquelet to rework it, so he kept the characters and retooled the premise. He shifted the setting from a remedial school to a family sitcom set in a suburban town. He built a family unit around his rejected creations. A blue cat, who would be the main character. A goldfish, who would be his best friend. A pink rabbit for a father. A cat for a mother. A small rabbit for a baby sister. He set them in a town called Elmore, California, a sunny, ordinary-looking suburb photographed from real locations in and around London, which we'll get into in a lot more detail later. And here's the detail that adds a whole other layer of warmth to the whole story. The main family's names are drawn from Bocquelet's own life. Nicole, the mother, who is competent and fierce and carries the family on her back, is named after his own mother, who he described as having that same kick-ass energy. Richard, the father, who is gentle and layabout and completely overwhelming in the sweetest possible way, is named after his own father, who he described with genuine affection as a giant man-child. Aeneas, the 4-year-old genius rabbit sister, is named after his sister. And Gumball? That's Bocquelet himself, a self-insert in the most charming way possible. The Wattersons' last name is a different kind of tribute entirely. They're named after Bill Watterson, the reclusive, singular creator of Calvin and Hobbes, one of the greatest comic strips in American history. Bocquelet has cited Watterson's work as an influence, and there's a deep running thread between the two. Calvin and Hobbes is a comic about a child with an enormous imagination who sees the world as a place of adventure, danger, and meaning, and who gradually becomes aware that growing up means losing some of that. Gumball, at its most philosophical, is about something similar. Both works use humor as a vehicle for ideas that are much bigger and much sadder than the comedy on the surface would suggest. The fact that Bocquelet named his family after Watterson is also quietly ironic when you understand what Watterson is famous for beyond the comic itself. Bill Watterson retired Calvin and Hobbes in 1995 at the absolute peak of its popularity. He walked away. He refused to license his characters for merchandise. He refused to allow anyone else to animate or continue them. When he was done telling his story, he was done. Completely, cleanly, with no apology. That was his creative philosophy, that his characters were too precious to be exploited. Bocquelet named his characters after a man who chose silence over compromise. And then he built a show whose central existential terror is that silence and obscurity are the things characters fear most. In Elmore, being forgotten is the worst thing that can happen. Being unknown is the void. To be Bill Watterson in Elmore would be to cease to exist. It's a beautiful, quiet tension sitting in the very DNA of the show, whether intentional or not. Turner Broadcasting executive Daniel Leonard greenlit the production in 2009. Work began in earnest with a London-based team that would handle storyboarding and pre-production, a Dublin studio called Boulder Media handling animation in the first season, and a German studio called Studio Soy coming on from Season 2 onward to handle the more complex technical work. The backgrounds, which would be one of the most distinctive things about the show visually, were photographed by the production team in real locations, primarily around London, then digitally processed to create the sunny, suburban Californian look of Elmore. The show premiered on Cartoon Network in the United States on May 3, 2011, with a sneak preview of an episode called The DVD. The official premiere followed on May 9th. It had already been renewed for a second season before the first episode aired, which tells you something about how Cartoon Network felt about what they were seeing. What they were seeing was unlike anything that had ever been on the channel. Nothing quite like it had ever been attempted in children's animation. A show where every character was rendered in a different visual style. 2D hand-drawn, 3D computer animation, stop motion, claymation, puppetry, flash animation, live action, all existing simultaneously in a world built from photographs of real places. It looked chaotic on paper. On screen, somehow, it felt inevitable. That's the origin. Rejected characters finding a home. A French animator named after a man who chose obscurity, building a world where obscurity is the end of everything. A show assembled from failure, made with love. It's hard not to find that beautiful. One more detail worth sitting with before we leave the origin story. The show premiered as the first full-length animated series ever produced by Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe, which became Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe. The London studio had existed before Gumball but had never produced a full series. Gumball was the proof of concept. The thing that demonstrated the studio could do it. And what they proved they could do was arguably the most visually ambitious thing in children's animation at the time. The show also had its world premiere not in the United States, but in the United Kingdom. On May 2, 2011, Cartoon Network UK aired a sneak preview of the episode The Mystery, a full week before American audiences got their first look. Then the UK got the full premiere on September 5th. The US premiere had happened before that, on May 9, 2011, but the international rollout meant that in its earliest days the show had its biggest initial footprint in Europe, which made sense given where it was made. Cartoon Network US had already ordered a second season before the first episode aired. You don't usually greenlight a second season of something you haven't shown the audience yet unless you have extraordinary confidence in what you're sitting on. That level of institutional confidence turned out to be justified. By the time Season 2 premiered in the US, it was the #1 broadcast of the day among boys aged 2 to 11 and 6 to 11, and #1 in its time period across essentially all children's demographic metrics. A show produced in London, assembled from rejected commercial characters, with photographic backgrounds and a dozen different animation styles existing simultaneously in the same frame, was the most watched children's program on American television by the metric of its target audience. That's an extraordinary outcome by any measurement. Section 2. The world of Elmore and the visual language of a place built from photographs. Close your eyes for a moment if you haven't already and picture Elmore. Not the cartoon characters moving through it, just the place itself. The wide suburban streets, the houses with the slightly oversized front lawns, the school with its fluorescent-lit corridors, the mall, the grocery store where Larry works, the park where things go wrong every other episode. Think about what it actually looks like as a setting, independent of the characters. Now here's the thing about Elmore that not everyone consciously registers. It's real. Not metaphorically real, actually real. Those backgrounds you're picturing, the streets, the houses, the storefronts, they're photographs. Real locations, most of them in and around London, England, that were captured by the production team and then digitally processed to feel like sun-baked suburban California. The decision to use photographic backgrounds was not a budget compromise. It was a deliberate, philosophically loaded creative choice, and Ben Bocquelet has talked about it in interviews with a kind of quiet pride that tells you it meant something specific to him. He was influenced by Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the 1988 film where animated cartoon characters exist physically in the real world, alongside live-action humans. What struck him about that film was the way the animated characters became more believable, more real feeling, when placed against an actual tangible environment. The concreteness of the world around them gave them weight they wouldn't otherwise have had. Bacalé wanted children watching Gumball to believe, on some level, that Elmore was a place they could actually visit. He wanted kids to look at their own suburban neighborhoods and see potential Elmores hiding in them. He wanted the setting to feel lived in because it literally was. Those streets had been walked on, those buildings had been photographed on real days with real weather. The backgrounds were handled by art director Jan Hukuis, and the technical process of making them work was genuinely demanding. When you place a 2D animated character against a photographic background, the character's lighting has to match the ambient light in the photograph or it immediately looks wrong. The characters need to cast shadows that make sense relative to the light sources in the image. The color temperature of the character's design has to harmonize with the palette of the photograph. All of this was figured out in real time by the production team, and it got increasingly sophisticated as the show progressed through its 6 seasons. There's also something worth sitting with about the specific locations that ended up in Elmore's visual makeup. The UK setting means the houses have a particular architectural character that's slightly different from what you'd expect in a California suburb. Chimneys in places American houses wouldn't have them. Certain proportions in the front gardens that feel subtly off if you're looking for the Simpsons Springfield aesthetic. Elmore has a faint Britishness to it that most American viewers probably never consciously notice but might sense on some level. A certain coolness to the light, a greener quality to the grass, architectural details that belong to a different country. This geographical displacement is one of the more quietly interesting things about the show's production, because it creates a setting that is both deeply familiar and slightly naggingly off. American viewers recognize the broad strokes of a suburban town, the detached houses, the lawns, the strip mall storefronts, but something in the peripheral detail feels wrong in a way they can't quite name. It's the wrongness of a near miss. A place that looks like it should be real but contains too many small inconsistencies to fully commit to being real. That friction between the familiar and the subtly incorrect is exactly the register the show operates in tonally. Gumball is a cartoon that wants you to believe it's real while simultaneously being composed of things that are impossible. The backgrounds enforce that reading physically. You're watching cartoon characters exist in what looks like actual London, pretending to be California, inhabited by a ghost and a talking goldfish, and a cloud person who manipulates weather with her emotions. The visual grounding makes the character's impossibility feel more pronounced, not less. By giving Elmore a real-world substrate, the show makes you more aware of how wrong everything else is. This is also why the void, when it eventually appears, is so visually effective. When the static starts consuming Elmore in the show's finale, what's being destroyed isn't abstract space, it's these specific streets, these specific buildings, this specific world that has been photographed from life. The destruction of Elmore feels like the destruction of something real, because the backgrounds genuinely are real, and removing them leaves a different kind of emptiness than simply ending an animated sequence would. The art direction team working on the backgrounds developed increasingly sophisticated techniques across the show's run. Early episodes processed the photographic backgrounds in a relatively flat way. They look somewhat like printed photographs, with a flatness to their color palette that distinguishes them from the more dynamic rendering of the characters in front of them. By the later seasons, the backgrounds had been treated with more sophisticated color grading and texture work, and the integration between the photographic world and the animated characters became increasingly seamless. If you watch a Season 1 episode and a Season 5 episode back-to-back, the visual evolution is genuinely striking. There's a production detail about the backgrounds that doesn't come up often. Many of the most recognizable recurring locations in Elmore have real-world counterparts in London that dedicated fans have identified and photographed. The street where the Watterson house sits has a real London equivalent. The exterior of Elmore Junior High corresponds to a real building. The mall, the park, the convenience store where Larry works, these are based on real locations that Ben Bacalé and the production team actually visited and documented. Knowing this creates an interesting dimension to the experience of watching the show. Somewhere in London, right now, there are streets that look almost exactly like Elmore. Streets where, in some version of things, Gumball and Darwin walk to school. Elmore is supposed to be California, but it's been built from London, and characters who have no logical reason to coexist, a ghost, a T-Rex, a cloud, a sentient balloon, walk through streets that feel simultaneously real and impossible. Now, the photographic backgrounds are only one layer of what makes Elmore's visual design so unusual. The characters themselves are the other, and this is where the show's approach becomes genuinely singular. The founding artistic principle of the amazing world of Gumball, as Mike Graves, the series director for the first 4 seasons, described it, came directly from his and Bakalay's background in commercial animation. When you're pitching characters for advertisements, you might design something in a clean 2D style one week and something in a 3D rendered style the next week. You're not trying to build a unified aesthetic world. You're pitching individual ideas. The visual diversity that resulted was just a consequence of pitching rapidly for different clients. Bringing that to Elmore meant that every character's visual style is essentially a relic of the project they were originally designed for. Gumball, Darwin, Nicole, Richard, and Anais are all rendered in a similar clean 2D style because they were designed together as a family unit. They were the new characters Bakalay created specifically for the show, so they share an aesthetic language. They look like they belong together. But Tina Rex, the class bully who is literally a Tyrannosaurus Rex, is rendered in 3D CGI. She has a different dimensionality, a different weight and texture, a different visual logic than Gumball. She was designed for something else and brought along. The Robinsons, Gaylord and Margaret, the grumpy neighbors who hate the Wattersons, have the look of felt puppets, stiff and slightly tactile in a way that makes them feel physically present in a different register than the 2D characters around them. Idaho, the sentient potato who is one of the gentlest characters in the show, has the texture and visual weight of claymation. He looks like something you could reach through the screen and pick up. Sussy, the bizarre live-action chin creature, is literally a human chin filmed upside down with googly eyes stuck to it. She is the single most radical departure from anything resembling conventional animation. And she is deeply weird, and she goes to school with a T-Rex and a ghost, and nobody treats any of it as remarkable. Then there's Ocho, the 8-bit spider, rendered in pixel art that looks genuinely lifted from a 1980s video game. He exists in the same physical space as Gumball and Darwin, but looks like he belongs to a completely different era of media. And he has a famous temper, which some fans have read as the existential fury of a character from a dead medium who has been transplanted into a world that has moved on without him. All of these different visual registers coexisting in the same scene creates what the show itself eventually addresses as a philosophical condition. Characters in Elmore look different because they are different. They come from different design philosophies, different visual worlds, different original purposes. The show's visual incoherence isn't a bug, it's the point. In a universe where your narrative function determines your reality, why would two characters from completely different narrative traditions look the same? There's a shot that appears in a late-season episode called The Night, where the camera pulls back from Elmore and you see the whole town from above. This tiny cluster of mismatched buildings and streets sitting in the middle of dark, empty space. Nothing around it. No other towns. No roads leading anywhere beyond the frame. Just Elmore. Isolated, small, surrounded by nothing. It's one of the most genuinely unsettling images in the show, but it makes complete visual sense when you think about what the show has been doing all along. Elmore isn't part of a larger world. It doesn't need to be. It's a closed system, a snow globe, a terrarium where characters from different places were all placed together and told to make it work. The photographic backgrounds, the mixed animation styles, the subtle geographic displacement of London masquerading as California, all of it creates a world that is simultaneously hyper-real and fundamentally impossible, a place that feels like you could go there and simultaneously feel like somewhere you've never been. That friction is what the show lives in, and it all started with a French animator taking photographs of London streets and asking whether cartoon characters could live in them. They could. They do. There's one more visual element worth noting before we leave the world-building section and move into the characters. The episode The Night gives us a rare, sustained look at Elmore after dark. at what the town becomes when the daylight that makes it feel suburban and ordinary is replaced by darkness. The streets that look sun-baked and welcoming in daytime become something else entirely at night. The photographic backgrounds, which rely on the specific quality of daylight to make them feel inviting, take on a different character under artificial light or moonlight or no light at all. The town that was designed to feel like somewhere you'd want to visit feels after dark like somewhere you might be lost. The contrast is precise and deliberate. The show understood that the same visual language that creates warmth by day can be repurposed to create unease by night. And it used this contrast carefully whenever it needed to shift registers from comedy to something more atmospheric. This is part of why The Joy, which takes place largely indoors but repeatedly cuts to exterior shots of the school, lands as genuinely unsettling. The show knows how to use its own visual vocabulary against itself, and it does so with more sophistication than most animated series ever achieve. The Watterson family, name by name and detail by detail. Let's take the main family one at a time, because each of them is a character study in their own right, and the details the show scatters across 6 seasons. The small continuity choices, the animation quirks, the voice casting decisions, add up to something richer than most people give the show credit for. We'll start with Gumball, because of course we will. Gumball Watterson is 12 years old, he's a blue cat, and he's the protagonist. Those are the basic facts. He goes to Elmore Junior High he's best friends with, and essentially inseparable from his adopted brother Darwin. He has a long-running romantic relationship with Penny Fitzgerald that doesn't fully solidify into an actual official couple status until nearly the end of Season 3, and he is at the center of almost every piece of chaos that unfolds in Elmore. What's less often noted is how many voice actors have played him. Over the course of the original 6-season run, Gumball was voiced by Nicky Jones in the test pilot, then Logan Grove for Seasons 1 and 2, then Jacob Hopkins from Season 3 through to Season 4, then Nicholas Cantu from a specific point in Season 5 onward, and then Duke Cutler for the Clip Show miniseries. Each transition happened because the previous child actor's voice changed with puberty. The show was unusual in its commitment to actually recasting when voices changed, rather than keeping an aging actor doing an increasingly strained approximation of a 12-year-old. What makes this genuinely interesting, rather than just a behind-the-scenes logistical note, is that the show addressed it directly on screen. The Season 3 episode, The Kids, is built entirely around Gumball and Darwin's voices changing, and it handles the subject with a kind of emotional intelligence that's unusual for a children's cartoon. The episode is, on its surface, a comedy about the awkwardness of puberty, but it's also an episode about growing up in a world that doesn't want you to grow up, about how certain kinds of change are resisted, reset, and ultimately undone by forces outside your control. The reset at the end of The Kids, where everything snaps back and Gumball and Darwin are suddenly younger sounding again, played not as a joke, but as something quietly melancholy, if you're in the right headspace for it. Logan Grove, the original series voice actor for Gumball, took the role at 12 years old. Jacob Hopkins, his successor, based his interpretation of the character on Grove's voice from early in Season 2, before it started to crack, but already past the cleanest part of it, which means he was essentially doing an impression of someone else doing a younger version of himself. There's something strangely fitting about that for a character whose entire relationship with identity is complicated and layered. Gumball's voice is an imitation of a version of himself that no longer exists. Now Darwin. Darwin Watterson is officially 10 years old to Gumball's 12, which lines up with the fact that Kwesi Bokie, his original voice actor, was genuinely slightly younger than Logan Grove. Both actors were remarkably close in age to their characters, which is part of what gave the early seasons that particular quality of naturalness in their performances. Bokie voiced Darwin through Seasons 1 and 2, and the handoff to Terrell Ransom Jr. also happened in The Kids, which means the episode that dealt with voice changes as a plot point was also literally the episode where the voice actors changed. The show made its casting necessity into its subject matter. Darwin was not always a member of the Watterson family. He was, in the show's backstory, the family's pet goldfish. One of several, in fact, since the earlier ones kept dying. He was a regular, non-sentient fish living in a bowl. Then one day, without warning, he spoke, and Nicole and Richard panicked and accidentally knocked him into the toilet, and he was flushed away into the sewer system of Elmore. The two-part episode, The Origins from Season 4, is the full account of what happened next, and it's genuinely beautiful in a way that earns its emotional weight. Darwin traveled through the sewers and across the city on brand new legs he grew somewhere in the process, crossing distances and dangers that a fish-turned creature with no preparation or experience should not have been able to survive. Driven by nothing except the pull back toward the Wattersons, toward Gumball specifically, toward the family that accidentally lost him. By the time he arrived back at their front door, he could speak, he could breathe air, he had legs, and he had a fully formed sense of love and loyalty toward a family that had barely known him as a fish. The show explains this with the phrase, "the power of love," which is either the most beautiful or most absurd explanation for spontaneous, evolutionary advancement depending on what you bring to it. Darwin was voiced by Kwesi Boaki at the ages of 11 and 12. Boaki would later note that his voice was already starting to change by the time he was replaced, which is genuinely poignant in the context of The Kids being about exactly that transition. The new voice actor, Terrell Ransom Jr., was around 10 when he took over, and his Darwin voice has a slightly different quality. A little more openly sweet, slightly less the wry sidekick, and slightly more the genuinely earnest best friend. It's a small difference, but real fans can hear it. Nicole Watterson. Where do you even start? Nicole is a cat. She's the mother of the family. She works at a place called the Rainbow Factory, and she is physically one of the most powerful beings in Elmore. The show escalates her combat abilities slowly and then all at once. Early seasons, she's just fast and formidable in an everyday kind of way. By mid-series, she can generate energy blasts, crack the earth with her fists, and outrun sound. The Season 4 episode The Fury, which we will talk about in enormous detail later, features a fight between Nicole and a rival named Yuki that was animated by a Japanese studio in the style of an anime action series, complete with energy attacks and destroyed buildings. The show treated it as completely appropriate. Nicole's backstory is laid out most clearly in The Choices, which stands apart from every other episode in terms of emotional weight and structural ambition. The episode moves through Nicole's life chronologically, and what it reveals is a childhood defined by two very different but equally damaging forces. Her father had a violent temper. The show doesn't show us specifics, but the implication of unpredictability and rage is clear. Her mother was a perfectionist who demanded constant excellence and could never be satisfied. Nicole grew up in a household where nothing she did was ever quite enough, and where the emotional climate was either explosive or coldly disappointed. The karate training she took up as a child was almost certainly a survival mechanism. It was the one arena where her drive could be channeled productively, where excellence was its own reward and didn't depend on a parent's approval. The skills that make Nicole terrifying as an adult, the combat ability, the superhuman speed, the capacity to generate energy from pure will, those were honed in a child trying to find somewhere to put all the tension of her home life. When Nicole met Richard in her late adolescence, the show presents it as a genuine revelation. Here was someone who was the polar opposite of everything her parents represented. Richard demanded nothing of her. Richard never raged. Richard was gentle and warm and completely without ambition. And in the context of Nicole's particular history, those qualities were probably the most attractive things she'd ever encountered. The episode The Choices shows us the moment she makes the decision. Love over her parents' expectations, and it's one of the most quietly moving moments in the show. Her parents didn't come to the wedding. That detail, dropped almost in passing in the episode, is one of the heaviest things the show ever conveys. Nicole chose love and was punished for it by the people who were supposed to celebrate with her. The absence at her wedding sits beneath every moment of Nicole's adult life, every burst of rage, every superhuman feat, every time she can't let herself relax even when the show sets up the opportunity for it. The episode The Painting features a school suggestion that Nicole try to relax and her complete inability to do so. She goes through escalating stages of breakdown trying to achieve calm. The show plays it as comedy And it is funny, but it's also an accurate rendering of what happens to someone whose nervous system was trained for crisis from early childhood. Nicole can't be calm because calm means unguarded means something terrible is about to happen. That was the lesson of her childhood. The body remembers what the mind has moved past. There's a fan theory that Nicole's superhuman combat abilities are actually an unconscious response to the existential physics of Elmore. That in a world where your power and significance correspond to your narrative function, Nicole's role as the family's safety net gives her abilities that scale to the size of what she's protecting. This fits the show's internal logic about how Elmore works. It also means Nicole's strength is not a personal gift but a condition of the role she occupies. She's as strong as she needs to be, and she needs to be very, very strong. Nicole's voice throughout the original run was provided by Teresa Gallagher, a British actress whose work on the show is extraordinary in its range. What's worth knowing is that Teresa Gallagher voiced not just Nicole, but also Penny Fitzgerald, Gumball's girlfriend, and numerous other characters throughout the series. 12 different characters by some counts. The fact that Gumball's mother and Gumball's girlfriend share the same voice actress has generated a lot of fan discussion over the years, and you can decide what to do with that information. Richard Watterson is Nicole's husband, Gumball's father, and the show's anchor for a particular kind of comedy that sounds simpler than it is wise. He's the bumbling, food-loving, physically enormous, practically incompetent stay-at-home dad. He sleeps too much. He makes decisions that are inexplicably bad. He forgets things immediately. He has at various points in the series caused minor, and not so minor, catastrophic events through pure incompetence. But here's the thing about Richard that the show returns to carefully across multiple seasons. He's genuinely loving, consistently, thoroughly, without condition. When Gumball and Darwin make fun of him in the episode The Hero and he overhears them and is visibly hurt, the episode doesn't laugh at him for being hurt. It takes his hurt seriously and makes the boys reckon with what they said. The resolution is one of the most quietly generous things the show ever does with a character. It suggests that Richard's willingness to be the butt of the joke, his cheerful acceptance of his own limitations, his constant soft presence at home, these are not failures. They are his contribution. He's the one who makes the Watterson house feel like a safe place to land. The episode The Job makes Richard's cosmic situation explicit. When Richard is hired as a pizza delivery driver, actually employed, actually working with purpose and responsibility, reality starts to fall apart. The sky cracks. Buildings warp. The laws of physics begin degrading. Nicole and the kids have to race to get him fired before the entire fabric of the world collapses. This episode plays as an absurd comedy about how useless Richard is, but it's also establishing something much more specific. The universe has a designated function for Richard Watterson, and that function is not working. His laziness is not a personality trait. It is a cosmic mandate. He is supposed to be exactly what he is, and reality itself will enforce that if he deviates. What this means, taken seriously, is that Richard is less free than any other character in the show. He can't grow into productivity. He can't be mentored into responsibility. The path that most stories present as growth, the bumbling father who learns to step up, is literally closed to him. The universe won't allow it. His destiny is the couch and the refrigerator and the video games and the cheerful incompetence, and the universe will destroy everything before it lets him be something different. There's a detail from The Laziest that adds another layer. Richard stole his title from Larry Needlemeyer in the summer of 1983. Larry used to be the laziest person in Elmore. It was his defining characteristic, his narrative function. Then Richard took the title, and Larry went in the opposite direction completely, eventually holding 38 simultaneous jobs. Richard taking laziness from Larry didn't just affect Richard. It reshuffled the identity landscape of the town. One person's cosmic function displaced another's and sent that person ricocheting to the opposite extreme. Richard was voiced by Dan Russell throughout the original series, and Russell returns for the revival as well. One of the two parents who have maintained continuity through the change in era. His voice has the quality of someone who is always on the edge of delighted surprise, which fits Richard perfectly. The character's physical design, pink rabbit, enormous frame, small features, creates a visual that is inherently comedic but never cruel. Richard's backstory is gradually sketched in across several episodes, and it's worth collecting the pieces. His mother, Granny Jojo, was enormously overprotective. She wrapped things in bubble wrap and put helmets on furniture and essentially treated the entire world as a danger zone her son needed to be shielded from. His father, Frankie Watterson, was a con artist who abandoned the family when Richard was young. So Richard grew up with a mother who prevented him from developing independence, and a father who demonstrated that the adults in charge couldn't be trusted. The result is a man who is, in some essential way, still a child. Not in a mean or dismissive sense, but in the sense that he never got the tools to do otherwise. And the show, to its enormous credit, doesn't treat this as a punchline. It treats it as a condition, with causes and consequences, and a genuine human guide. What the show does, eventually, is something genuinely affecting. It shows Richard as a better parent than he was ever parented. He's present in a way his own father wasn't. He's warm rather than smothering. He plays with his kids without demanding they be different from what they are. In the Watterson house, which is chaotic and underfunded and physically dangerous on a semi-regular basis, there is a person who loves his children completely and unconditionally and shows that love through presence rather than ambition. Richard can't hold a job. He can hold a child's hand. He can be the soft place to land. That's not nothing. The show understands that it's not nothing. Anais Watterson is 4 years old, she's a pink rabbit like her father, and she is objectively the most intelligent member of the Watterson family by a significant margin. She speaks 4 languages, she understands advanced mathematics, she has solved problems in individual episodes that adults couldn't manage. She is, on a pure cognitive level, operating several standard deviations above everyone around her. And she is, in a way that the show handles with genuine sensitivity, profoundly lonely. Her intelligence makes it impossible to connect easily with children her own age. Her physical age makes it difficult to be taken seriously by the older children she goes to school with. She can solve a differential equation, but she can't figure out how to stop smothering a potential friend. In The Friend, she invents an imaginary friend because the real ones haven't worked out. And the imaginary friend turns out to be violent and chaotic, which the show plays for comedy but which lands somewhere deeper if you're paying attention. The imaginary friend is essentially a projection of her frustrated need for connection. It has all the energy and chaos she's been keeping inside, and it's willing to do for her what real friends won't. Anais was voiced by Kyla Ray Kowalowski throughout the entirety of the original run, notably one of the few main characters to keep the same voice actor the whole time, because Kowalowski's voice didn't change dramatically enough to require recasting. She was 9 when she took the role. By the time the show ended, she was approaching her late teens and still voicing a 4-year-old convincingly. The voice work for Anais required Kowalowski to maintain a consistently younger-sounding register for years, and the performance has a distinctive quality. Slightly formal in its delivery, slightly older sounding than a real 4-year-old even when delivering a line that makes complete emotional sense for a 4-year-old. Anais sounds like a genius 4-year-old, which is a specific register that the show needed to maintain consistently across 6 seasons, and Kowalowski delivered it. In the revival, Anais was recast for the first time, Kinza Syed Khan taking over the role, because Kowalowski had aged out of the register entirely. The change was handled with no fanfare, no in-show acknowledgement, in contrast to the elaborate meta-commentary that accompanied Gumball and Darwin's recasting in Season 3. Anais just sounded different in the new show and the production moved on. There's a small fan detail worth noting about Anais. The episode The Oracle features the moment where Anais asks the central philosophical question of the show. After Banana Barbara's painting comes true, after the predicted events unfold exactly as the painting showed, Anais turns to the camera and asks, "Would any of this have happened if we hadn't seen the painting?" She's 4 years old and she's asking about determinism, about whether observation causes events or merely predicts them, about whether free will can coexist with a prophetic framework. The episode frames this as a neat closing gag, a funny button on a comedic premise. But Anais isn't being whimsical. She's being precise. She has identified the specific philosophical tension in the episode and articulated it as a question with real stakes. and the show characteristically doesn't answer it. It just ends, leaving the question floating in the air. That is Aeneas Watterson in miniature, identifying the exact right question and being given no answer. Section 4B, The Educators of Elmore Junior High. Before we get into the technical production details, I want to pause on the adults of Elmore Junior High because the school staff are a fascinating collection of characters who each embody a different kind of institutional dysfunction. Miss Lucy Simeon is Gumball's teacher, and she's ancient. Not, she's been teaching for a long time, ancient. Literally 2 million years old. The show confirms this in The Ape and other episodes. She has been a teacher since before Homo sapiens existed as a species. She predates agriculture, writing, mathematics as a formal discipline, and essentially the entire span of human civilization. She was grading papers when our ancestors were learning to make tools. Think about what 2 million years of teaching means. She has had students who were literally different species than the ones sitting in her class now. She has watched civilizations rise and fall. Every student she's ever taught, every single one, is long dead. She is the one constant, and the one constant is that she hates her students. This is the show's most extreme version of the trapped-in-role concept. Miss Simeon didn't choose to teach for 2 million years. She didn't accumulate experience and wisdom that gradually shaped her practice. She calcified. She became defined entirely by her function, and her function is to stand at the front of a classroom and resent the people sitting in the desks. The rage she directs at Gumball isn't personal. It's the rage of a being who has been doing the same thing for longer than most geological formations have existed. There's a subtle implication in the show's treatment of her age that deserves to be said out loud. If Miss Simeon has always been a teacher, and if the show's internal logic links existence to narrative function, then Miss Simeon may be one of the original inhabitants of Elmore. She may have been there before the void was conceptualized, before the reset was established, before the universe had developed the quality control mechanisms that create the show's existential stakes. She's a remnant of something earlier, still performing a function that predates the current rules. Her relationship with Principal Nigel Brown is its own interesting study. Brown is considerably less ancient than Simeon. He appears to be simply middle-aged in the ordinary way, and he runs Elmore Junior High with a combination of incompetence and romantic distraction. His primary characteristic is being consumed by his feelings for Miss Simeon, which is a comic setup, but also raises an interesting question. What does it mean to be in love with someone who has been watching people live and die for 2 million years? How do you meet a person where they are when their perspective is that long? The answer, apparently, is that you don't. You just keep showing up, which Brown does, and you make that consistent affection available for however long you're able to, and you let that be enough. Which is quietly a rather hopeful way of thinking about the show's treatment of mortality and impermanence. Mr. Steve Small, the school counselor, is the show's hippie archetype. Crystals, mantras, incense, an unshakable conviction that everything will work out if you breathe deeply enough. He's played for laughs as someone whose spiritual toolkit is completely unsuited to the actual problems students bring him. But the show gives him a backstory that makes his spirituality a lot more poignant. He was in the void. He entered the void in the Season 3 episode that introduced it, traveling with Gumball and Darwin in Janice the Van. He made it out, but the void erased his memory of what he experienced there. His entire spiritual practice, all the crystals and mantras and deep breathing, might be an unconscious response to trauma he can't consciously access. He treats wounds he can't see with tools that are, at least, oriented toward the same kinds of feelings a trip through dimensional annihilation would produce. The meditation isn't silly from the inside, necessarily. From the inside, it might be the only thing that keeps certain thoughts at bay. And Janice, his van, the van they used to enter and escape the void, was also sent to the void at some point for being a relic of a bygone era. Mr. Small's attachment to Janice is, in this reading, the attachment of two beings who went through something together that neither can fully remember or talk about. I want to spend some time on the actual practical reality of making Gumball, because it's genuinely fascinating and because it doesn't come up often in conversations about the show, Most people either watch it or watch analysis of its themes and stories. The technical side, how the thing is actually assembled from its component parts, is its own remarkable story. The show was produced out of London, which is itself unusual for an American network's animated series. Cartoon Network is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, and most of its original programming has traditionally been made either there or in other American studios. Gumball was the first series produced by Cartoon Network Development Studio Europe, which was based in London. The fact that it worked as well as it did, artistically and commercially, was a proof of concept for the viability of that European studio. And you can trace a direct line from Gumball's success to the continued investment in Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe, which is what that London studio eventually became. The production pipeline for Gumball was divided across multiple studios, and understanding the division of labor helps you understand why the show looks the way it does. The London studio handled the creative core, writing, storyboarding, character design direction, and the overall visual aesthetic. Then, for the first season, animation work was split between Boulder Media in Dublin, Ireland, and Dandelion Studios. From Season 2 onward, Studio Soy in Germany took on a major portion of the animation and technical work, handling the 2D in-betweening, rendering, and compositing. Studio Soy were the ones who built out the technical pipeline that allowed 2D characters and 3D elements and photographic backgrounds to coexist in the same frame coherently. This is harder than it sounds, by the way. When you have a flat 2D character standing in front of a three-dimensional photographic background, creating visual consistency requires a lot of careful work with lighting, shadow, and color grading. The characters need to look like they're actually occupying the same space as the background, not like they've been pasted on top of a stock photo. In the early episodes of Season 1, the compositing isn't quite as polished as it becomes later. There are moments where Gumball's colors feel slightly disconnected from the world around him, where the lighting doesn't quite sell the illusion. By Season 2 and 3, the technical team had figured it out to a much higher degree, and the characters started feeling genuinely embedded in the photographic world. The software used in the production included Maya for 3D elements, Adobe Photoshop for background processing, and both Adobe Flash and Toon Boom Harmony for the 2D character animation. Toon Boom Harmony became the primary tool for the 2D work from Season 2 onward, and it allowed for more fluid and expressive animation than the Flash pipeline had managed in the first season. If you go back and watch the very early episodes alongside later ones, one of the things you'll notice is that Gumball's body proportions and facial features actually shift slightly between the pilot and the first few episodes, and then shift again across seasons. His eyes change size, his fangs change shape, his body becomes more proportionally fluid. This wasn't inconsistency. It was a show learning what it was over time, adjusting the visual language as the production team got more comfortable with their own tools. There's a famous production detail from the very first batch of episodes. The animators early on were still figuring out how to consistently move Gumball's face in ways that conveyed emotion without losing the design. There are moments in Season 1 where his facial expressions feel slightly stilted or exaggerated in an odd direction. By Season 2, something had clicked, and he became visually expressive in that fluid, almost rubber hose way that became the show's signature physical comedy register. Now let's talk about the specific characters who required the most technically complicated production choices. Tina Rex, the dinosaur. She's rendered in 3D CGI, which means she's computed differently from the 2D characters around her, and requires her own separate animation pipeline. Getting a 3D dinosaur to feel naturally present in a scene with 2D characters in a photographic background requires careful attention to her movement, her scale, her lighting. The production team had to establish visual rules for her weight and her relationship to the ground plane that would read consistently across multiple scenes and episodes. She's not in as many episodes as you might expect, partly because she's technically expensive. The Robinsons, Gaylord and Margaret, are designed to look like puppets, and their movement reflects this. They have a stiffness and a limited range of expression that distinguishes them from the 2D characters. This was a deliberate design choice, and one that has accumulated meaning as fans have noticed it. The Robinsons being rendered like puppets makes them feel controlled, constrained, which fits their characters perfectly. They're the neighbors who refuse to participate in Elmore's chaos, who maintain their grumpy formality while everything else flows around them. Of course they look like puppets, of course they're stiff. Susie, the live-action chin creature, required a different production approach entirely. She's actually filmed, with a camera, as a real human chin inverted and held in place while googly eyes are attached to the skin. The footage is then composited into animated scenes. The actress behind Susie, Fergus Craig in some episodes and others in the production, would sit very still in this awkward position while the scene was filmed or recorded. Then the footage would be shrunk and placed into the frame. It's a genuinely unusual production approach, and it shows on screen in the best possible way. Susie has a tactile wrongness to her that no amount of animation could replicate. And then there's The Puppets, the Season 5 episode that crossed over with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, the darkly surrealist British web series about puppets and creativity and control. For this episode, the Gumball production team actually commissioned physical felt puppets to be created, not animated to look like puppets, but actual physical puppets built and filmed in the style of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared's own production. The crossover required collaboration between the Gumball team and the Don't Hug Me creators, Becky Sloan and Joe Pelling, and the result is one of the most visually striking episodes in the show's history. Gumball and Darwin entering a world where the rules of their reality are replaced by the rules of a different, more sinister kind of children's television. Mike Graves, the series director for the first 4 seasons, directed every single episode of those 4 seasons himself. That's a remarkable achievement when you consider that each season contained between 36 and 40 11-minute segments, which is an enormous creative workload for one person to maintain. Graves brought a background in both commercial animation, he was also a Studio AKA alumnus, and children's programming. He'd worked on the British show Peppa Pig, among others. The comedic timing that became the show's signature, the visual gags that land because of precisely calibrated pause and reveal, those rhythms were largely Graves's contribution. There are also production details attached to specific episodes that are worth noting. The Fury, which contains the most technically ambitious sequence in the show's original run, was produced with the assistance of Studio 4 Degrees Celsius, a prestigious Japanese animation studio known for feature film work and artistically ambitious projects. Bakale originally wanted Studio Trigger, the Japanese anime studio known for Kill La Kill, among others, to animate the fight sequence, but Trigger was unavailable. Studio 4 Degrees Celsius stepped in and created an anime-style battle that replicates the visual language of 1980s Dragon Ball while adding its own technical sophistication. The episode The Fury premiered at Polymanga, a French pop culture and gaming convention in Montreux, Switzerland in 2016 before it aired on Cartoon Network. Then it aired on April 1, 2017, alongside other episodes with googly eyes digitally added to the characters' faces as an April Fool's gag. This is the level of commitment the production team had to playing with the medium. The show won 8 British Academy Children's Awards during its original run, and was nominated 11 additional times. It won the Annie Award for Best Animated Television Production for Children in 2012, which is one of the most prestigious recognitions in animation, and was nominated 5 more times. It won a Prix Jeunesse, a Kidscreen Award, an International Emmy Kids Award, and numerous other recognitions. For a show that looked from the outside like controlled chaos, it was recognized by the industry as something genuinely exceptional, which tells you that the chaos was controlled. One award worth mentioning separately, the Prix Jeunesse is a German award for children's television, presented at a biennial festival in Munich. It's one of the most internationally respected recognition systems in children's media, and winning it in 2012 placed Gumball in company with shows that take children's television seriously as an art form. For a British-American production about a blue cat to win that award in its first season was a statement about what the show was doing that went beyond the American children's animation context it was primarily operating in. The show's ratings also deserve more detailed treatment than they sometimes get. Season 1 averaged just under 2 million viewers per episode in the United States. Strong numbers for a children's cable series. Season 2 actually saw an increase in certain demographics. By Season 3, viewership had settled into a consistent and loyal audience. Seasons 4 and 5 saw some erosion in raw numbers, not unusual for any long-running series. But the show's fan engagement actually deepened during this period. The community of people who watched the show closely enough to track its continuity, debate its theories, and analyze its themes was growing, even as the casual audience shifted. This pattern, a show whose dedicated audience grows more invested as its casual audience becomes less consistent, is characteristic of cult properties, and Gumball has genuinely earned that descriptor. It has the fan engagement profile of a prestige drama with the broadcast context of a children's cartoon. The production budget for the show was never publicly disclosed in detail, but the escalation in visual ambition from Season 1 to Season 6 is visible enough to suggest that the budget grew as the show's commercial success justified the investment. Season 6 episodes, which include some of the most technically complex sequences in the show's history, look significantly more sophisticated than the first season episodes that were still figuring out the compositing pipeline. Section 5. The supporting cast of Elmore. Small characters, large worlds. There's something particularly wonderful about stopping on the supporting characters of Gumball rather than the main family, because the supporting cast is where a lot of the show's most interesting texture lives. These are the characters who get 1 or 2 episodes of focused attention over the course of 6 seasons, but whose presence throughout all the other episodes adds an enormous amount of background warmth and strangeness to Elmore. Let's wander through some of them. Larry Needlemeyer. Larry is technically classified as an origami rock, which is a visual design choice that makes complete sense once you've seen it, and absolutely no sense when described in words. He is the most employed individual in Elmore, working at essentially every commercial establishment in the town simultaneously. The grocery store, the gas station, the fast food restaurant, the DVD rental shop, the video game store, the movie theater, the convenience store. Larry is there manning the counter, making minimum wage. In the episode The Menu, the show gives us the number. He holds 38 different jobs and he earns $7 an hour. The episode of The Pizza is the canonical Larry showcase. When the Wattersons are terrible customers, as they always are, one too many times, Larry quits. He quits all 38 jobs simultaneously, and Elmore descends into actual civilizational collapse. Stores close, services fail, people riot in the streets. The fabric of commercial society in the town disintegrates because one man stopped working. This tells you something specific about Elmore's structure. Larry Needlemeyer is the infrastructure of the whole town. Without him, nothing functions. He is simultaneously the most exploited and the most essential being in Elmore. He earns the minimum wage across 38 jobs and doesn't sleep. The night episode confirms he's working through the hours when every other character is unconscious. He lives in a condition of permanent labor at the baseline economic floor of his society, and the moment he exercises his right to stop, everything falls apart. There's a fan theory that floats around in the Gumball community suggesting that Larry's obsessive work ethic isn't just drive or duty, it's terror. The theory goes that Larry, consciously or not, is aware of the void, the dimension where Elmore's discarded and irrelevant beings end up. And he works 38 jobs because having 38 jobs makes him maximally indispensable. Nobody can erase someone who holds together the entire economy of the town. He's working himself to the point of no sleep, not because he loves work, but because stopping feels like ceasing to exist. The show doesn't confirm this explicitly, but it does establish, in The Laziest, that Larry used to be the laziest person in Elmore before Richard Watterson took that title in the summer of 1983. After losing the title, Larry went in the complete opposite direction, becoming the hardest worker in town as a way of defining himself. This suggests his identity is reactive rather than intrinsic. He doesn't work because of who he is. He works because of what he's afraid to be. Larry's girlfriend is named Karen. She appears occasionally. They seem happy in the context of a relationship where one member works 38 jobs and doesn't sleep, which suggests she is either remarkably patient or has a very full life outside the relationship. Carrie Kruger. Carrie is a ghost. She's been dead for... The show never gives a precise number, but she's been described at various points as 327 years old, which puts her death sometime in the 1600s by the show's internal timeline. She attends Elmore Junior High, which means she goes to school with children who are alive, watching them grow and change and experience things she never will. Because she stopped at some point in her childhood and has been stopped ever since. Carrie can possess the bodies of other characters, which she does occasionally in order to experience physical sensations. In particular, eating. She can taste food only by possessing someone else and inhabiting their experience of taste, which means that every meal Carrie has is mediated through another person's body. There's something quietly devastating about that if you sit with it. Her personality is the classic literary goth, dry sardonic, into horror and the macabre, presenting detachment as her default register. She has a darker aesthetic than everyone around her, and she often seems faintly amused by the distress that other characters experience in situations she's already died in the metaphorical equivalent of. Darwin develops feelings for Carrie over the course of the show, and she reciprocates, and they become an official couple in the Season 5 episode, The Matchmaker. It's handled with the show's characteristic warmth. It's also an inherently bittersweet setup if you track it forward. Darwin will age. Carrie won't. Darwin will grow up and eventually move through phases of life that Carrie is frozen outside of. Their love is genuinely tender. It's also structurally impossible to sustain in any long-term sense without someone getting hurt, in a way that can't be fixed. Carrie's father, by the way, was described as a villain who reformed. The show never clarifies the details. Given that Carrie is hundreds of years old, her father's villainy presumably predates every other character in the show by generations. He exists as backstory and shadow, the suggestion of a more complicated life history than Carrie's sardonic present tense would indicate. Banana Joe is a banana. He's the class clown. He makes puns about being a banana. He has a father named Banana Bob and a mother named Banana Barbara, and his mother is one of the most significant characters in the show's larger mythology, despite getting relatively limited screen time. Banana Barbara appears throughout the show as someone absent-minded and eccentric and difficult to track in conversation. She wanders off, she gets lost in Christmas stockings, she shows up in places without apparent reason. But her defining characteristic, which the show takes very seriously when it addresses it, is that she can paint the future. Literally and specifically. Her paintings always come true. The backstory here is the episode The Future, which explains that Banana Barbara wasn't always this way. She used to be functional and competent. She worked at a company called Shanax Inc., and the stress of being overworked by her boss caused a breakdown. After that breakdown, her prophetic abilities emerged. Her gift, her ability to see things that haven't happened yet and render them in paint, is the direct product of her mind breaking under pressure. She sees truly now. But the price of that vision was her sanity, and nobody takes her seriously because her sanity went with it. In the later seasons, Rob kidnaps Banana Barbara specifically because of her ability. He wants her to paint the future so he can prepare for the Void's eventual consumption of Elmore. Every painting she produces shows only static, no future, nothing but white noise and oil paint. If her paintings always come true and the future is static, then the future of Elmore is nothing. She's known this for a long time, probably, and she hasn't been able to tell anyone in a way that would be believed. She's an oracle who paid for her sight with her mind. One of the show's genuinely melancholy figures, rendered in broad comedy most of the time. Bobbert, the school robot. He attends Elmore Junior High and consistently has the highest academic performance of any student there. He can access any information. He can process calculations that the other students need days to work through. He has a defense mode that turns him into a much larger, more dangerous robot. What Bobbert cannot do is understand emotion. The show gives him a consistent arc about trying to develop genuine social connection, and repeatedly shows how his inability to parse emotional context creates misunderstandings and failed relationships. In The Robot, he goes so far as to impersonate Gumball completely, taking on his appearance, his speech patterns, his social relationships, in an attempt to understand what it means to be the character Gumball is. The episode plays this as comedy, but it also touches something real. Bobbert literally replacing Gumball represents the anxiety of being substituted, of being the original version of something that can be copied more efficiently. Bobbert doesn't appear to have parents. He doesn't have a home that the show ever shows us. He's at school every day, processing information, trying to understand feeling through data. In the context of the show's ongoing meditation on what it means to exist and matter, Bobert is a character who is entirely defined by his function, by what he can compute and process and produce, with no backstory and no life outside his utility. Tobias Wilson is a rainbow-colored humanoid whose primary characteristic is that he desperately wants to be the protagonist of a story about himself. He has the confidence and the aesthetic markers of the popular kid. He wears athletic gear. He talks with the cadence of someone who believes he's cool, but his attempts at coolness consistently fail. And the show treats him as someone whose desire to be central is consistently rejected by the narrative he inhabits. The Season 5 episode The Test features Tobias actually becoming the main character. Temporarily, when Gumball abandons his assigned role after an online quiz tells him he's the loser of his own story. The show becomes a different show around Tobias, a cheesy, laugh-tracked sitcom with different visual conventions and a different comedic register, and it's immediately unwatchable. The characters within the show find it unbearable. The episode ends with a reveal that it was all Tobias's dream, which is a joke about sitcom cliches but is also the show explicitly telling its audience that Tobias doesn't have the depth or complexity to be the center of a story. He wants to be the main character. He isn't. He'll never be. And unlike Rob, who made his peace with something like that in a different register, Tobias just keeps trying. Hector Jotunheim is the giant. He's so large that he can barely fit in the school building, and his mother keeps him isolated and emotionally suppressed because his size makes his feelings dangerous. When Hector gets upset, genuinely, fully upset, the scale of his body makes the resulting damage catastrophic. He's been taught from the beginning of his life that feeling things is a threat. The episode The Colossus shows his mother's emotional suppression regime. She has rules, she has potions, she has an entire system for keeping her son from fully feeling. Hector is the show's most literal embodiment of the idea that for some people, being who they really are is treated as dangerous. He's the character who's been told from birth that his authentic emotional life is a problem that needs to be contained. The comedy of his size coexists with something genuinely touching about a kid who just wants to feel things and has been taught that he can't. Idaho. A sentient potato with a kind face from a farming family who goes to a school where his classmates eat potatoes. The show mentions this exactly as often as it needs to, which is to say, barely at all, and then moves on. The casual horror of Idaho's existence is never dwelt on. It's just there. He exists as food in a world that eats his kind, and he goes to school anyway, and he's one of the gentler characters in the show, and the comedy is entirely in the dissonance between his fundamental vulnerability and the casualness with which everyone treats it. Section 5B. The friendship that holds everything together. There's a specific quality to the relationship between Gumball and Darwin that deserves its own space before we move into the supporting cast. Because when you spend time thinking about what the show is actually about at its core, underneath the philosophy, underneath the visual innovation, underneath the meta-awareness, the answer is consistently this. It's about what it means to have someone who shows up for you without question. Gumball and Darwin are best friends and brothers. Their dynamic is the beating heart of the show. And what makes their friendship genuinely affecting, rather than just a children's television trope, is how specifically it's rendered in individual episodes. They fight. They embarrass each other. They make each other worse sometimes, dragging each other into situations that neither of them would have ended up in alone. There are entire episodes built around the idea that these two people are occasionally terrible for each other. And then there's the next episode where they're fine. The reset doesn't just serve the show's meta-narrative, it serves the relationship. Gumball and Darwin are the kind of friends who can have a catastrophic falling out and come back from it, not because they've done the emotional work of reconciliation, but because their fundamental orientation toward each other is one of unconditional continuity. The friendship doesn't require maintenance because it's the default state. Not being friends would require effort. Being friends is just what they are. The episode The Bros captures this most precisely. Penny, Gumball's girlfriend, Ask Gumball to spend more time with Darwin because she's noticed that Darwin is struggling with the shift in Gumball's attention now that there's a romantic relationship in the picture. Gumball predictably handles this poorly. The episode becomes about jealousy and exclusion, and the way a third party can change the dynamic between two people who have always been each other's primary relationship. But the resolution isn't Darwin and Gumball having a formal conversation about their feelings. It's smaller and realer than that. A moment where they just exist together again. And everything that was wrong gets resolved not through communication, but through proximity. There are episodes where Darwin is the more emotionally intelligent of the two, and episodes where he's the more naive. There are episodes where Gumball is the protective one, and episodes where he's the source of the problem that needs protecting from. The balance shifts, which is what makes them feel like a genuine friendship, rather than a fixed arrangement of roles. The voice actor transitions for both characters, which I mentioned earlier, also track the friendship in an interesting way. The original duo, Logan Grove and Kwesi Boki, had a dynamic quality that early fans often describe as more naturalistic than subsequent pairings. The slight roughness of two real kids recording together in a studio, the occasional moments where a delivery sounds genuinely unscripted. As the show went through multiple recasting rounds, each new pairing brought something slightly different. Jacob Hopkins and Terrell Ransom Jr. had their own chemistry. Nicholas Cantu and Danielle Hansley Jr. had theirs. The friendship has always been there, but the precise texture of it shifted each time, which mirrors something real about how relationships change as the people in them change. Darwin's defining characteristic, his optimism, his loyalty, his moral groundedness, functions differently in the context of the friendship than it does when you analyze it in isolation. When you're thinking about Darwin as a character, his relentless positivity can seem like a cosmic imposition, a trait installed by the universe because sidekicks are supposed to be the moral anchor. But when you watch him and Gumball together in a good episode, his positivity doesn't read as cosmic imposition. It reads as someone who loves their brother and expresses that love through generosity of interpretation. He gives Gumball the benefit of the doubt, not because he's programmed to, but because he's decided to, over and over. The scale tips differently when you add the relationship as context. One more detail about the two of them together. The show confirms in multiple episodes that Gumball and Darwin sleep in the same room. Their bedroom is shared, which is standard in many real households, and perhaps especially common in a family where the parent's financial situation is always precarious. But there's also something about the image of them in adjacent beds, talking in the dark before they fall asleep, that anchors the show's warmth in the most domestic possible way. All the philosophical weight, all the existential risk, all the cosmic manipulation. At the end of the episode, these two go home and sleep in the same room. That's where the show lives. That's what it's protecting. I want to give Rob his own full section because Rob's arc across 6 seasons is genuinely one of the most complete character journeys in modern animation, and telling it properly requires going through it chronologically. Seasons 1 and 2, Rob exists. That's the sum total of his story. He's a background character, a tall blue cyclops who stands in crowd scenes at Elmore Junior High. He has no dialogue, he has no storyline, he has no family. He doesn't even have a friend group. He's there because a school needs background students, and he fills the space without contributing to it. The show never calls attention to him in these seasons. You probably don't notice him at all unless you go back looking for him. That invisibility is the point. Season 3, The Void. This is where the show introduces one of its most significant concepts. Gumball and Darwin notice that their classmate Molly Collins has disappeared, not just from school, but from everyone's memory. They're the only ones who can almost remember her, and even their memories are vague. When they investigate, Mr. Small accidentally reveals the existence of something he calls the Void. The Void is a dimension made of static and television noise. The universe sends things there when it decides they're mistakes. Obsolete ideas, failed products, people, and characters who aren't interesting or useful enough to justify their continued existence. Molly was sent there because she was too boring. Not cruel, not harmful, boring. She didn't serve a sufficiently interesting narrative function, so she was removed, and her removal was made invisible. Gumball and Darwin enter the void to rescue her, riding in Mr. Small's van Janice. While they're inside, wandering through the static, there's a figure in the background, standing near a prototype model of the Watterson house, also sent to the void for being an early design that was deemed inadequate. The figure watches Gumball and Darwin. He tries to get their attention. They don't notice him. They rescue Molly. They run for the van. Rob grabs the back of the van at the last possible second. The void tries to keep him. It tears at him. It warps him. By the time he makes it back to the real world, his body has been permanently altered. His design is now glitchy and polygonal. His head has cracked and reformed in asymmetric ways. Pieces of him look like they've been compressed by static. He's visually marked by what happened to him. He hides in the Wattersons' basement for months afterward with no memory of who he was. Season 3, The Nobody. Gumball and Darwin find Rob living in their basement and have no idea who he is. When they ask, he tells them, "I'm a nobody. I have no place in this world." He says this as a factual statement, not a self-pitying one. He literally was judged by the universe to be unnecessary. He literally was erased. He literally can't remember who he was before that. Gumball and Darwin, trying to help, make a suggestion that turns out to have enormous consequences. They point out that all the positive roles in Elmore are taken. Hero, sidekick, love interest, comic relief. There's no vacancy in any of those, but there's one role available. The villain. The nemesis, the bad guy. And Rob, desperate for any identity, takes it. He becomes the antagonist because the structure of the world he lives in offers him nothing else. Season 4, The Nemesis and The Disaster. Rob has been developing his villain persona, and by these episodes he's acquired the most powerful object in the show. A universal remote control, able to manipulate reality as though it were a television broadcast. He can rewind, pause, fast forward, change the language, change the aspect ratio, skip scenes. In The Disaster, he uses it to devastating effect, and the episode becomes a showcase for just how broken the reality of Elmore can become when its underlying rules are made explicit and weaponized. The crucial scene in The Disaster is Rob's confrontation with Gumball, where he tells him the truth. He never wanted to be the villain. He wanted to be the cute sidekick who gets merchandise and fan art, and eventually a spin-off. He wanted to matter. He wanted people to know his name. But in a world designed around Gumball as its protagonist, there was no room for Rob to be anything except the obstacle in Gumball's path. The system forced him into the role. He didn't choose it. What makes this unbearable in the best way is that Rob is correct. He's not being self-pitying about a situation that's actually his fault. He's accurately describing how the world works. The rerun, the continuation of that story, does something remarkable. Gumball ends up in the void and genuinely tries to help Rob. He reaches out. Rob, seeing actual human kindness from the person he's supposed to hate, makes a sacrifice. He uses the universal remote to rewind time and undo all the damage he's caused. But rewinding also erases Gumball's memory of the reconciliation. It erases Rob's one moment of genuine connection. Rob gives up his only chance at friendship in order to fix what he broke. And nobody knows. Nobody will ever know. Season 6, The Inquisition. Rob has figured out that the void isn't just a garbage dimension for inconvenient characters. It's cancellation. It's what happens when the show ends. He knows the show is going to end, and he knows that when it does, Elmore will be consumed by the static. He has a plan. Infiltrate Elmore Junior High as Superintendent Evil and systematically transform every student and teacher into a live-action human being who could survive in the real world after the show's universe disappears. He's trying to save them, all of them, including Gumball. Gumball and Darwin fight him because that's their role. They don't know what Rob knows. They stop his plan. They celebrate. And then the ground cracks and the sky breaks, and the static starts seeping through, and Rob falls into the void first. The character who spent the entire series trying to warn everyone, trying to save them, falls into oblivion while everyone else stands confused and the screen cuts to static. For years, that was how the show ended. Just that. Rob falling. Static, no resolution. The revival series, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, which premiered in July 2025, picks up this thread in the episode The Rewrite. It reveals that the shady shopkeeper who runs the awesome store, a mysterious character who appears throughout the show selling plot device objects from a van, rescued Rob from the void. And Rob, in his new phase, has shifted his motivation entirely. He's no longer trying to destroy Gumball or force an external solution. He's protecting Elmore from within, taking actions to keep the show's reality stable without anyone knowing he's doing it. He falls back into the void at the end of The Rewrite deliberately to prevent Gumball and Darwin from discovering the truth about their world. A discovery that would trigger the void's return. He sacrifices himself, again, for people who will never know what he did. He becomes a hero by becoming invisible. He goes from nobody to villain to prophet to martyr to guardian to nobody again. Except now it's a chosen nobody, a deliberate self-erasure in service of others. The character whose defining wound was invisibility chooses to be invisible because it's the only way to protect the people he's come to care about. Rob's arc is extraordinary. It's not a dark theory. It's the actual show, telling an actual story about an actual thing. Section 7, The Void, The Reset, and the Fourth Wall. Here's where we get into the meta-architecture of Elmore, which is the framework that gives everything else its meaning. This isn't theory. This is the explicit text of the show, confirmed in episodes going back to Season 3 and extending through the revival. But it's worth laying out slowly and carefully because the implications are wide-ranging. Elmore exists as a television show within a television show. The characters are aware of this on varying levels. The universe has rules that correspond directly to the conventions of a broadcast medium. Interesting characters survive. Boring ones are removed. Continuity resets between episodes because that's how episodic television functions. Reality can be manipulated with a TV remote. The void is what happens when the show gets canceled, when the audience stops watching. The show has been building toward this revelation since the beginning, and it confirms or implies different pieces of it in different episodes. Let's walk through them. The void established the first major principle. There is a quality control mechanism built into the reality of Elmore, and it operates without mercy. Characters, objects, and ideas that don't meet whatever standard the universe has set for interest or utility are removed and forgotten. This is canon, not theory. The show explicitly states this through the episode's premise and execution. The Job from Season 2 established the second major principle. Richard Watterson has a cosmically mandated role, and deviating from it breaks reality. When Richard gets a job, actually working, actually being productive, the sky cracks and buildings warp and the laws of physics start failing. The universe cannot accommodate Richard having a job. His cosmic role is to not have one, and enforcing that role is more important than the stability of physical law. The Signal from Season 4 is the episode where the show breaks down as though the broadcast signal is failing. Characters' sentences get cut off. Scenes jump forward. Actions loop. Gumball notices something is wrong with his world but can't articulate what it is. The show presents this as a television transmission problem. The frequency on which Elmore exists is degrading, and the characters are experiencing it as reality falling apart. This is the clearest statement of the principle that the characters literally live on a frequency, and that their continued existence depends on that signal being maintained. The test showed what happens when the protagonist abandons his narrative function. When Gumball stops being the loser, his assigned role, Tobias steps in and the show literally becomes a different show, with different visual conventions and a different protagonist. Nature abhors a narrative vacuum. The implication is that someone has to fill every role, and if the person assigned to a role vacates it, the structure will find a replacement. The Money is perhaps the most direct episode about the economics of the show's existence. When the Wattersons run out of money, the show itself begins to decay. Animation quality drops, product placements appear in dialogue, the visual world starts cheapening around them. Their bank account and Elmore's existential stability are literally the same thing. The show needs funding to exist, and in Elmore's internal logic, commercial viability translates directly into physical reality. There's something specifically precise about the money that distinguishes it from the show's other meta-aware episodes. Most of those episodes use the meta-awareness as a philosophical frame. The universe's rules happen to mirror TV conventions. The money makes the analogy economic and therefore brutally honest. The characters don't just live in a show. They live in a show that requires advertisers. Their reality is product-supported. Their existence is a commercial proposition. The void isn't just cancellation, it's financial unviability. If nobody buys what Gumball is selling, Gumball stops existing. This is an extraordinarily cynical thing for a children's cartoon to say about itself. It's also completely accurate about how television works. The Shady Man, also called the Awesome Store Operator, appears throughout the show as a recurring source of plot devices. He operates from a van, selling objects that inevitably have enormous narrative consequences. The universal remote that Rob eventually acquires? Cursed objects, mysterious items. He's never fully explained in the original series. He exists on the margins of Elmore's social geography, never integrated into the town, always transacting and then disappearing. In the revival, his role becomes clearer. He's the person who rescues Rob from the void after the Inquisition. He gives Rob a new purpose. He's the character who seeds the next act of the story. The fan theory that presents him as a meta-aware entity who exists outside the normal rules of Elmore, not a citizen, but something like a game master, someone who distributes plot devices to ensure interesting things keep happening, is given more textual support in the revival than the original series provided. If the theory is correct, the Shady Man is one of the most powerful beings in Elmore. He's not powerful in the conventional combat sense. He's powerful in the narrative sense. He ensures that the conditions for interesting stories persist. He keeps the engine of Elmore's drama running, and without interesting drama, the void advances. In that framing, the Shady Man isn't selling toys. He's maintaining the entropy gradient that keeps the show alive. That's an odd kind of heroism, and it fits the show's understanding of what heroism looks like in a world where the highest value is being interesting enough to survive. The Disaster and The Rerun, Rob's showcase episodes, establish the universal remote and the manipulability of reality as a broadcast. Rob uses the remote to rewind time, fast-forward through scenes, change the language setting of reality. Gumball resists the philosophical implications when Rob tells him the truth. Can't you see that none of this is real? And Gumball's refusal to engage is itself a form of self-preservation. Characters who become fully aware of their fictional status are dangerous to the system. Awareness is what got Rob sent to the void in the first place, and awareness is what drove his entire arc. The Inquisition gave us the clearest statement of what the void actually is: the end. Cancellation. Rob's plan to turn everyone into live-action humans so they can escape to the other place, presumably the real world, is his attempt to make the characters real enough to survive the show ending. He fails, and the void begins consuming Elmore, and it ends in static. And then the rewrite in the revival extended this mythology to establish that Rob's job now is to prevent that discovery from happening again. To keep Gumball and Darwin in the dark about what they are, because the truth would destroy everything. There's a line from Ben Bacalé in an interview when asked about the theory that Elmore is a simulation. "I've got my own theory, which I will not reveal." He said this with the slight smile of someone who knows exactly what's in the box they're not opening. His silence isn't a denial. It's an acknowledgement that the theory is on the right track, and that some answers are better left as questions. Think about what all of this means when applied to the behavior of every character we've talked about. Gumball is reckless and constantly generates chaos and interesting situations, because on some level, not consciously but structurally, he understands that boring characters get removed. His chaos isn't purely personality, it's survival. Darwin's impossible evolution from fish to person happened because the narrative needed a sidekick, and the universe reshaped reality to provide one. Nicole's superhuman abilities exist because the show needs her to be the safety net the competent adult who prevents complete catastrophe. Richard is cosmically mandated to be lazy. Larry is structurally required to work everywhere. Penny was kept in her shell until the plot needed her true form revealed. Banana Barbara's paintings are prophecy only because the future is already written, storyboarded, and animated. The void is not a metaphor for cancellation. It is cancellation. And every character in Elmore is performing, whether they know it or not, to stay out of it. Section 8. The most fascinating individual episodes. There are episodes of Gumball that repay individual analysis at a level most children's television doesn't offer. Not because they're the funniest, or the darkest, or the most action-packed, but because they do something specific that stays with you. Let's wander through some of them. The Choices is possibly the single most emotionally sophisticated episode in the show's run. It traces Nicole's life from early adolescence forward, showing the pivotal moments that led her to where she is now. We see her parents, a mother who demanded constant perfection, a father with a violent temper. We see the karate training she channeled all of her domestic tension into. We see the moment she met Richard, unassuming, gentle, completely unlike anyone her parents would have approved of. And we see the alternate timelines, what Nicole's life would have looked like if she'd made different choices. One of those alternates shows Nicole as a literal dictator. The show doesn't play this for shock, it presents it as the logical extension of someone with Nicole's drive, Nicole's capability, Nicole's conditioning toward control and excellence, if she'd chosen power over love. Given what we know about her childhood, about the rage she carries and the perfectionism that lives alongside it, absolute power isn't satirically outrageous for Nicole. It's disturbingly plausible. The episode's conclusion. Nicole choosing love, choosing Richard, choosing the ordinary, chaotic family life rather than any version of success or control, is genuinely moving. The show earns its emotional payoff. The Shell is the episode where Penny breaks out of her shell and reveals her true form to Gumball, and it's one of the most beautifully constructed emotional set pieces in the show. The climax, where Gumball chases Penny through Elmore as she transforms between forms driven by her self-loathing, and then catches up to her and tells her simply that he likes her. Not conditional on what she looks like, not despite anything, just that he likes her, full stop, is a piece of children's television that works as an adult with no diminishment whatsoever. It's about being seen without condition. It's about someone refusing to flinch from you at your most frightening. It's about the difference between accepting someone's self-image and simply seeing past it to the actual person. The Joy is the show's horror episode, and it goes fully, committedly horror in a way that is genuinely impressive for a children's cartoon. It's structured as found footage, security camera timestamps, handheld camera perspectives, gradually mounting dread as more characters fall to an infectious happiness virus. Miss Simeon, in a sequence that stands among the most memorable things the show ever did, navigates the infected school while pretending to be one of the Joy-infected students. She makes it almost all the way to safety, and then she sees Banana Joe with his peel unzipped. Miss Simeon, who has been a teacher for 2 million years, who has been disciplining students for longer than recorded history, who cannot, even in a zombie apocalypse, let a dress code violation go unaddressed. She zips up his peel. She's spotted. She barely makes it to the office. And then it's too late. The final shot of Miss Simeon recording herself as she's infected, rainbow liquid pouring from her mouth, her eyes going wide, saying, "This story has come to a happy ending," and beginning to laugh hysterically, is one of the creepiest things Cartoon Network has ever broadcast. And then the episode ends. No resolution, no cure confirmed. Just a pre-recorded clip of Principal Brown fooling around with a broom playing on the camcorder. And then nothing. The episode's underlying argument is as interesting as its horror execution. The Joy virus doesn't just make people happy. It removes their agency and replaces their personality with a single directive: spread the joy. And the cure is Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Sadness, grief, the most famous piece of music associated with melancholy and loss. Happiness in this episode is literally a virus. Forced joy is a zombie apocalypse. The only defense is being allowed to feel sad. That's a very specific thing for a comedy show to say about itself. The downer is the show's depression episode, and it works because it doesn't explain itself. Gumball wakes up and finds that everyone is gone. The town is empty. He wanders through deserted streets, through a silent school, through vacant houses. For a while, he thinks it's wonderful. No rules, no obligations, total freedom. Then the silence becomes oppressive. The emptiness starts to feel like abandonment. The world hasn't just become quiet, it's become alien and hostile. Familiar places stripped of the presence that made them meaningful. The reveal, that this is Gumball experiencing a depressive episode, that the other characters didn't leave because his depression made him unable to perceive them, is handled without dramatic announcement. The show doesn't explain depression in a way that feels like a PSA. It just shows it in terms that are visual and atmospheric and immediately recognizable to anyone who's experienced it. The Others is the episode where Gumball discovers that a classmate named Claire Cooper has her own life, her own problems, her own story that has nothing to do with him. His reaction is genuine disturbance, not hostility, but existential unease. In a world literally built around him as the protagonist, the existence of an independent narrative is a threat. He can't help trying to insert himself into Claire's story because that's how his reality works. Other things existing independently of him is conceptually difficult to process. The episode resolves with a lesson about empathy, but the lesson is tinged with anxiety in a way that distinguishes it from the simple morality of most children's television. Gumball learning that other people's stories matter doesn't fully resolve the underlying problem, which is that in a narrative built around one protagonist, sharing the spotlight feels existentially dangerous. The finale, the Season 2 finale, is the episode where all the consequences of every previous episode arrive simultaneously. Every character the Wattersons have ever wronged shows up with a grievance. Larry has been mistreated dozens of times. The school has been damaged repeatedly. The city has suffered. The episode functions as the show examining its own structure. The episodic reset that makes Gumball possible is also a form of injustice. The characters around the Wattersons bear the cost of events that the Wattersons get to walk away from, because the next episode starts fresh. The resolution, where the show essentially acknowledges that the only solution is to reset again and pretend none of this happened, is one of the most self-aware endings in the show's history. It admits that the comedy machine runs on forgetting. The Copycats is the episode where the show directly addresses the real-world situation of having been plagiarized. Miracle Star was a Chinese animated series that used character designs visually similar to Gumball's, and the show responded by making an episode about it. Gumball and Darwin encounter a Chinese family that appears to be a copy of the Wattersons. Same basic composition, slightly worse in every detail. And the horror of meeting yourself rendered as an inferior duplicate is real. If a copy can exist independently with its own show and its own audience, then your uniqueness, the thing that was supposed to keep you from the void, isn't unique at all. You're a template. The Origins two-parter is the show's most sustained piece of emotional storytelling. It follows Darwin's journey from fish to family member in real time, and it's structured as an adventure narrative. But an adventure narrative in which the hero is a confused, newly legged fish navigating a hostile city driven only by love and nothing else. Darwin doesn't understand what's happening to him. He can't strategize. He can barely walk. He just keeps going in the direction of the people he loves. The two-part episode is one of the most rewatchable things in Gumball's catalog because it works simultaneously as comedy, action, and genuinely moving character story. The Question is perhaps the show's most honest philosophical episode, and notably, it's one of the few that asks a real question and gives no answer. Darwin is in crisis about what the meaning of life is, and he and Gumball spend the episode asking every character they encounter. Every answer is wrong in a different way. The episode ends without resolution, which is appropriate. The show is honest about the fact that the question doesn't have a universally applicable answer. You have to find one or make one. The Void in Season 3 is the episode that established the foundational mythology of the show, and returning to it with the full context of the later series reveals details that weren't visible on first watch. Rob is there in the background. You can see him if you look. He's been there the whole time. He's been trying to get someone's attention. The episode, on rewatch, is haunting rather than just intriguing. The Kids, which handles the voice actor change so gracefully, is also quietly one of the most emotionally resonant episodes in the show's run. It's ostensibly a comedy about Gumball and Darwin's voices changing, but the episode's subject is growing up, about the way childhood ends incrementally, about how the things that made you who you were gradually give way to something different, about how you can't go back once certain thresholds have been crossed. The reset at the end, which puts Gumball and Darwin back in younger voices, is played as triumphant in tone but is actually melancholy if you think about what it means. They can't grow up. The show won't let them. They'll be 12 and 10 forever, or until the void comes. The Inquisition has the most specific and interesting visual language of any episode in the series. As the void begins consuming Elmore, the visual effect of the destruction is not the spectacular, explosive kind you'd expect from a finale. It's quiet. Things start to separate. The mixed media elements of the show begin to come apart from each other, the 2D characters losing their relationship with the photographic backgrounds, the CGI elements drifting free of the composited reality, the whole world of Elmore disaggregating into its component animation styles. What holds Elmore together is the visual coherence of all those mismatched elements coexisting. And the void destroys that coexistence first. Elmore doesn't explode. It comes unmade. It's the most accurate possible ending for a show that was always about whether things that don't belong together can somehow belong together anyway. Section 9. Production secrets, hidden details, and Easter eggs. Gumball's writing room and production staff were clearly people who loved pop culture broadly and deeply, and the show's references are genuinely wide-ranging. Some of them are obvious, meant to land immediately. Others are embedded deeply enough that they're still being found years after the episodes first aired. Almost every episode title begins with "the" followed by a noun or concept. This isn't just a quirk, it's a stylistic commitment that runs throughout the entire original series. There are only two exceptions, Halloween and Christmas, both of which are holiday specials. In Japan, this convention was abandoned because episode names in the Japanese version were changed to follow the naming conventions of anime series, which typically use different structural patterns. The backgrounds of Elmore are photographed from real London locations, but the art direction team deliberately color-graded and processed them to feel like California. Many of the specific locations used have been identified by dedicated fans, particular streets in South London, parks in certain boroughs, architectural details that are distinctly British but have been made to feel generically suburban American through saturation adjustment and lighting treatment. It's a visual sleight of hand that works almost entirely invisibly for most viewers. Gumball went through several voice actors for the main characters, specifically because the show used child actors genuinely close in age to their characters. The test pilot had Nicky Jones voicing Gumball. Jones had previously voiced the title character in Cartoon Network's Chowder, which is its own fun piece of crossover trivia. Darwin in the test pilot was voiced by Jake Pratt, a child actor who had appeared on Britain's Got Talent. Neither Jones nor Pratt carried into the series proper, where Logan Grove and Kwesi Boki took over the roles. Boki's Darwin had a quality that later voice actors tried to capture, a genuine openness and warmth that came from a real kid voicing the character rather than an adult doing an impression. When Terrell Ransom Jr. took over as Darwin in Season 3, he reportedly based his interpretation on the sound Boki had established, particularly from Season 1 before any cracking started. The generational handoff of the voice is its own odd form of continuity. In The Fury, the anime fight between Nicole and Yuki, the specific visual style was intended as a tribute to Kill la Kill, the Studio Trigger anime. Ben Baccalé originally wanted Studio Trigger themselves to animate the sequence, with director Hiroyuki Imaishi doing the work. Studio Trigger were too busy. Studio 4 Degrees Celsius stepped in and replicated the Kill la Kill aesthetic closely enough that even dedicated anime fans frequently mistake the style. The fight was also compared to Dragon Ball Z by design. The flashback to Nicole and Yuki's training is explicitly drawn to resemble the classic sequence of Goku and Krillin training under Master Roshi. The sequence premiered at Polymanga, a French pop culture convention, before it aired on Cartoon Network. This is one of the more unusual distribution choices for a children's cartoon episode, premiering at a fan convention rather than simply airing on television first. The Watterson's surname being a tribute to Bill Watterson is confirmed by Ben Bockelay in interviews, but the depth of the tribute deserves more unpacking. Calvin and Hobbes ran from 1985 to 1995 and is widely considered among the greatest American comic strips ever created. Bill Watterson is famously private and reclusive, having refused almost all public engagement since ending the strip. He never allowed Calvin and Hobbes to be merchandised, never allowed animated adaptations, never allowed sequels or continuations. His philosophy was that the characters deserved to be protected from commercial exploitation. By naming his family after Watterson, Bockelay was in some sense placing his characters under a kind of informal patronage, suggesting that Gumball and Darwin and the Wattersons carry something of that same spirit of creative integrity. Whether or not the show lived up to that aspiration is an interesting question, but the gesture was clearly meaningful to Bockelay. Teresa Gallagher, as mentioned earlier, voices Nicole and Penny and numerous other characters throughout the show. The specific number varies slightly depending on how you count minor one-off appearances, but 12 distinct characters is the figure that appears most often in production credits. Carrie Shale voices Larry, Bobbert, Leslie, Alan, and several others. Dan Russell voices Richard and also played Mr. Fitzgerald in several other roles. The ensemble nature of the voice cast, with individual actors performing many characters, is a practical efficiency that also creates a sonic texture throughout the show. You occasionally catch a familiar vocal quality in an unexpected character, a reminder of the small community of performers who brought Elmore to life. The show addressed its own production realities in The Money, where the Wattersons running out of money directly causes the show's production quality to degrade. Product placements appear, animation becomes cheaper, the world literally becomes less real. It's one of the few moments where the show's meta-awareness and its commercial reality overlap explicitly and directly. The boredom featured cameo appearances from characters in 3 other Cartoon Network shows: Clarence, Regular Show, and Uncle Grandpa. These were brief visual gags, not plot-integrated crossovers, but they established that in some version of the cartoon landscape, Elmore exists in the same universe as those other shows. The implications of this have never been fully explored. The test pilot, Early Reel, is a significantly different visual and tonal experience from the series proper. Gumball and Darwin have different designs. Gumball has larger eyes, different proportions, slightly different coloring. The animation style is less polished, and the tone is a little rougher around the edges. It exists primarily as a historical document of what the show was before it became what it became. And it's genuinely interesting to watch if you know the series well, because you can see both how much changed and how much of the essential spirit was already there. There's a visual detail that's easy to miss in the very early episodes of Season 1. The sun in certain exterior shots has freckles. This minor design quirk was quietly dropped after a handful of episodes and never returned. No explanation, no announcement, just gone. In Season 2, the Wattersons' eyelids are darker when they blink or close their eyes, a small animation detail that was changed in Season 3, when the whole visual style was refined and the characters' eyes became permanently rounder. Richard and certain other family members had oval-shaped eyes in early seasons. These were gradually standardized as the show's visual language evolved. Mike Graves, who directed every episode of the first 4 seasons, left the director's chair after Season 4. The Seasons 5 and 6 had different directorial arrangements, which contributed to the slightly different visual rhythm of those seasons, both in terms of comedic timing and in the increased willingness to attempt technically ambitious sequences. The show's production team was multinational in a way that's unusual even for international productions. French creator, British studio, Irish animation partner in Season 1, German animation partner from Season 2, with additional collaborators in places like Japan for specific sequences. The show's visual diversity isn't just an artistic choice, it's partly the fingerprint of an international team, each contributing something from their own production culture. Masami Yoshida, the cloud girl whose wealthy family owns the Rainbow Factory, is a character whose class dimension the show develops quietly but consistently. Her father's wealth insulates the family from the existential vulnerability that other characters navigate. While Larry works 38 jobs to stay relevant, Masami's family has effectively purchased permanence through economic power. In the context of the show's ongoing meditation on what it costs to maintain existence in Elmore, this makes the Yoshida family a portrait of a different kind of security, one bought rather than earned through narrative function. There's a dark equity implication in that the wealthiest characters are the ones least vulnerable to the void. The character of Clayton, the shape-shifting compulsive liar, deserves a closer look than he usually gets in discussions of the show. His shape-shifting is different from Penny's. Penny shifts based on her emotional state. Her transformations are involuntary expressions of her inner life. Clayton shifts deliberately, strategically, to become whoever he needs to be for the moment. He's a conscious performer of identity. The show presents this as a character flaw, but it also suggests that Clayton may be the character most adapted to Elmore's underlying logic. In a world where your narrative function determines your existence, the ability to perform any function is the ultimate survival skill. The problem is that Clayton can't stop. He lies when there's no strategic benefit. He lies about things that don't matter. He's lost the relationship between performance and necessity and become so adapted to not being himself that there may no longer be a himself to return to. He's the cautionary tale for the logical endpoint of Elmore's identity system, perfectly adapted to the performance and hollow at the center. There's a background character in the show named William, a floating eye with wings. He appears throughout the series in crowd scenes and occasional featured moments. He never speaks. He can't speak. He has no mouth. He communicates through actions and expressions and the movement of his single enormous eye. In the few episodes where he's given focus, he's presented as thoughtful and observant, taking in everything around him with that single unblinking eye. He's the watcher of Elmore. In a show about characters whose survival depends on being watched, he watches. He never performs. He observes. His existence is entirely different in register from every other character in the school, and the show seems to know this without ever fully commenting on it. The background character density of Elmore Junior High is actually remarkable if you catalog it. The show introduced dozens of students over its 6 seasons, each with a distinct visual design reflecting a different animation style or visual medium. Most of them appeared in the background of classroom scenes for years before getting any dialogue or focus. Some of them, the Green Bear, the 8-Bit Dog, several unnamed characters, have never been given names in any official material. They're there in every crowd scene, living lives the show never follows, filling space in the world of Elmore the way the rejected commercial characters always did in Ben Bakalay's portfolio. Present, unnamed, waiting to matter. Section 10. The Philosophy of Gumball and its Legacy. There's a conversation to be had about what the amazing world of Gumball actually is, beyond the categories of children's show and comedy and animated series. Not because those categories are wrong, but because they're insufficient. The show is, at its deepest level, a piece of sustained philosophical inquiry dressed as a children's cartoon. The questions it keeps returning to: what makes an existence meaningful? What are the conditions under which a person deserves to continue existing? What is the relationship between identity and the roles we're assigned? What happens to people who are forgotten? Are not children's questions. They're not any particular age group's questions. They're the questions that come up at 2 in the morning when the room is quiet and the brain won't stop. What distinguishes Gumball's treatment of these questions from other shows that touch on similar territory is that it never stops being funny while asking them. The horror and the comedy coexist in a way that's genuinely difficult to maintain, and the show maintains it across 6 seasons and 240 episodes with remarkable consistency. The total episode count of the original series is worth stating clearly: 240 11-minute segments, or the equivalent of 120 half-hour episodes. This is an enormous body of work. Most animated shows don't reach this volume. The ones that do often plateau creatively well before the end. Gumball's creative output remained consistently inventive across all 6 seasons. There are weak episodes inevitably, but there's no period where the show clearly lost its way or ran out of ideas. The 6th season, the final one, contains some of the most thematically ambitious episodes in the series. The critical reception for the show evolved significantly over its run. Season 1 was generally received warmly but somewhat superficially. The visual style attracted attention. The comedy was praised, but reviewers mostly treated it as a successful novelty. By seasons 3 and 4, something had shifted. Critics and viewers began taking the show seriously as a work of art. The meta-awareness, the philosophical depth, the consistent quality of character writing, these were being recognized not as accidental, but as deliberate. The show had grown a reputation for being smarter than it looked, for rewarding close attention, for having accumulated a genuine cosmology across its run. Wikipedia's summary of the show's critical reception includes a specific phrase worth noting. The series received particular praises for its extensive references to popular culture and internet culture, sarcasm, subtle innuendos, dark humor, and meta-humor. That's a striking collection of qualities for a children's show to be praised for, and it reflects something true about what the show was doing. It was working simultaneously at different levels of sophistication, and it was doing so deliberately. The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, the revival, had significant pressure on it when it premiered in July 2025. 6 years had passed since The Inquisition. The audience that grew up with the original show was now in their late teens and 20s. A new generation of children was encountering Gumball for the first time. The question of whether the show could work for both simultaneously was real. The answer, based on the 100% Rotten Tomatoes score and the early viewer response, is yes. The revival maintained the visual vocabulary, the comedic register, and the philosophical DNA of the original while updating its cultural references and technological context. The same Elmore, the same rules, the same essential characters, but produced with 6 years of additional animation technology and a creative team that had spent those years thinking about where to take it. The renewal for 2 more seasons before the second batch had even aired tells you something specific about the institutional confidence in what the team is doing. Hanna-Barbera Studios Europe has committed to a long-form continuation of the story, which suggests that the revival was not conceived as a nostalgic cash-in, but as a genuine creative continuation. And the movie remains in development. Bacalé confirmed at Annecy 2024 that it's still being worked on. The cliffhanger will eventually have a resolution. Rob will have his full arc completed. The void will be addressed on the terms the original series established. For a show that ended in static, it has been remarkably persistent in its refusal to be forgotten. The critical reception for the show evolved significantly over its run. Season 1 was generally received warmly but somewhat superficially. The visual style attracted attention, the comedy was praised, but reviewers mostly treated it as a successful novelty. By seasons 3 and 4, something had shifted. Critics and viewers began taking the show seriously as a work of art. The meta-awareness, the philosophical depth, the consistent quality of character writing, these were being recognized not as accidental, but as deliberate. The show had grown a reputation for being smarter than it looked, for rewarding close attention, for having accumulated a genuine cosmology across its run. The cult following that developed around Gumball is unusual in its composition. It spans age ranges and demographics in a way that's relatively rare for a children's show. People who watched it as children and grew into their teens and 20s maintained their engagement with it because the show had always been operating on a level that could grow with them. New viewers discovering it as adults found it immediately engaging on the philosophical and meta level without requiring the childhood nostalgia as an entry point. The fan community that developed on Reddit and YouTube and various wikis is one of the more intellectually active fan communities in animation, consistently producing analysis that treats the show with the same rigor you'd apply to prestige television. The ending of the original series, Rob falling into the void, the screen cutting to static, everything unresolved, was divisive but also deeply appropriate. Ben Bacalé has confirmed that the cliffhanger nature of The Inquisition was not his choice for how the show ended. He'd planned a movie that would resolve the story. When that movie fell through initially, with the original HBO Max release being canceled in 2022 as part of Warner Bros. Discovery's content purge, the show remained in limbo for years with no resolution. The revival, The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball, began airing on Hulu in the United States in July 2025, 6 years after the original series ended. Bacalé returned to Helmet. New voice actors took the roles of Gumball, Darwin, and Anais, Alkeothele, Hero Hunter, and Kinza Side Khan respectively, while Teresa Gallagher and Dan Russell returned as Nicole and Richard. The revival scored a perfect 100% on Rotten Tomatoes from early reviews, which is about as unambiguous a critical endorsement as exists. It was subsequently renewed for third and fourth seasons before the second season even aired. The Wonderfully Weird World of Gumball deals with some of the same existential themes as the original. Rob returns, the void threatens, the meta-awareness of the show's fictional status continues to be part of the fabric. But it also updates the setting with new technology. One episode apparently involves a sentient AI falling in love with Nicole, and new cultural reference points. The show has always been of its moment in terms of what it references, and the revival extends that into the current digital landscape. The movie The Amazing World of Gumball, the movie, is still in some form of production as of 2025 to 2026. Bacalé confirmed at the Annecy Animation Film Festival in 2024 that it was still being worked on, with significant script revisions happening. In a late 2025 interview, he indicated having a new angle for the story. The movie is intended to address the cliffhanger from The Inquisition more directly than the revival series has. What the show ultimately built across its original run and continuing into the revival is one of the more coherent and internally consistent fictional universes in modern animation. The void, the reset, the mixed media visual language, the meta-awareness, these aren't random quirks. They're an integrated system that rewards comprehension. Watching the show knowing its rules is different from watching it for the first time, and that's rare in children's animation. The show's emotional core, for all the philosophical density and the existential anxiety, is straightforwardly warm. The Wattersons love each other. Gumball and Darwin love each other. Penny and Gumball's relationship, when it finally arrives as an actual relationship in Season 3, is rendered with real tenderness. The show believes in connection. It believes in the importance of being seen. It believes that one person telling another person, genuinely and without condition, that they're beautiful and worth knowing, that that moment matters, that it changes things, that it holds back the static. Rob's arc, taken to its conclusion, is about someone who started as nothing, was damaged by forces beyond his control, spent years defined by a role he didn't choose, and ended up choosing invisibility as a form of sacrifice. That's a complete story. That's a real arc. That's the kind of character writing that animation doesn't always reach, and when it does, it tends to be in shows that are remembered for a long time. This is one of those shows. Section 11. Smaller details, miscellaneous facts, and things that deserve mentioning. There's still a lot of territory left to cover because Gumball is genuinely inexhaustible on the detail level. Here are the smaller facts, the production curiosities, the character notes that didn't fit neatly into the sections above but deserve their moment. The character Sussie's name is a tribute. Sarah G. Lato, the obsessive fangirl ice cream character, is named after Sarah Fell, the show's producer. The show has a long history of naming background and minor characters after members of the production staff. Penny Fitzgerald has a detail almost nobody knows. She's allergic to blueberries. This is established in The Dream, referenced again in The Voice via an Elmore Plus status update, and mentioned a third time in The Romantic. It's a small, specific detail that exists purely to add texture to her character, a real-world vulnerability for someone whose superpower is transforming into anything based on how she feels about herself. The contrast between her emotional shape-shifting and her allergy to a very ordinary fruit has a quiet comedy to it. Penny is a Capricorn. The episode The Astrological establishes this, placing her birthday between December 22nd and January 19th. Whether this was intended as a meaningful character detail or an off-the-cuff writing choice is unclear, but it's been noted by fans who enjoy mapping character traits to astrological frameworks. Capricorns are traditionally associated with ambition, discipline, and reserved emotional expression, which fits Penny's character in her shell-wearing seasons, though perhaps less so after she breaks free. The show's episode titles follow an almost perfect rule. Every single one begins with "the" followed by a noun or concept. The only two exceptions in the entire original run are Christmas and Halloween, both holiday specials. This naming convention was maintained so consistently across 240 episodes that the two exceptions are immediately jarring when you encounter them in an episode list. In Japan, the convention was abandoned because the translation team changed episode names to match the structural patterns of Japanese anime series, which have different titling conventions. The character Juke is a boombox with a face who communicates exclusively in sounds and music. He never uses words. Every emotion, every reaction, every attempt at communication is expressed through audio samples and music fragments. He's the character whose entire existence is metaphorical for a type of communication that operates outside language. The show doesn't make a big deal of Juke's speechlessness. He's just Juke. He communicates the way Juke communicates. Anton the Toast has one of the stranger existential conditions in the show. He's regularly destroyed, eaten, burned, crumbled, torn, and then he's just back. The Season 4 episode The Recipe establishes that Anton's regeneration involves actual duplication. Banana Joe and Darwin discover they can create multiple Antons from the same toaster mechanism. Each Anton is a new Anton. The previous Anton is gone. Anton isn't healing from his destructions. He's being replaced by identical versions of himself that don't have his memories or his accumulated experiences. By the end of a normal school week, how many Antons have existed? How many have ceased to exist? The episode plays this for comedy and handles the philosophical implications with the show's characteristic lightness. But if you sit with the Anton problem for a while, it intersects with the show's broader questions about identity and persistence. If you're replaced by an exact copy that believes itself to be you, does the continuity of identity survive? Is the Anton we see in Season 3 the same Anton who appeared in Season 1? Or has he been replaced so many times that the question doesn't have a coherent answer? Gumball's full legal name is revealed in The Name, Zach Watterson. Gumball is a nickname that stuck so thoroughly that the actual legal name faded into background status. The episode's villain, the Zach personality that emerges when the legal name is invoked, is everything Gumball isn't: aggressive, confident, selfish, without the redeeming sweetness. The family goes to court to change the legal name back to Gumball, and the show frames this as saving Gumball from an identity that would have consumed him. The episode is funny. It's also, in the context of everything the show does with identity and narrative function, one of its most loaded. The name Gumball is a cartoon name. It sounds like a character in an animated series. Zach is a human name. It sounds like an actual person. When Bacalé made the original show, he described Gumball as a kind of self-insert. His name sounds like a cartoon character's. Zach sounds like the real person underneath the cartoon. The episode where Gumball has to fight his own real name to stay Gumball is the show at its most meta without ever announcing it. The Donut Cop, whose actual name appears to be Officer Larry, no relation to Larry Needlemeyer, is one of the show's most beloved background characters. He's incompetent, he's distracted. He often arrives at the scene of chaos after everything important has already happened. He's the show's parody of law enforcement ineffectiveness, and he's handled with a comic lightness that makes him lovable rather than cynical. In at least one episode, he joins in the chaos he was supposedly called to contain. He's a good person who is very bad at his job, which is an entirely different thing from the show's villains, who are bad people who are sometimes good at their roles. Rocky Robinson, the school janitor and son of the Robinsons, is presented as the cheerful, aspirational inverse of his parents. Where they're grumpy and withdrawn, he's warm and present. Where they refuse to participate in Elmore's chaos, he navigates it with equanimity. He wants to be a rock musician. He works as a school janitor. He seems genuinely okay with this for now. Rocky's contentment is itself a small statement. Not every character in Elmore needs to be in crisis about their place in the world. Some people just live in their world with what they have. The character Masami, the Cloud Girl, is worth one more mention here for a detail that's easy to overlook. When Masami cries, it rains. Not metaphorically, literally. Her emotional states translate directly into weather phenomena. She has, in certain episodes, caused storms by being upset. This is presented as her species' natural characteristic, but in Elmore's context, it's also worth noting that the wealthiest character in the show is the one whose emotions have the most literal, immediate impact on the physical environment. Masami's feelings shape the weather. Everyone else's feelings just hurt them. The scale of emotional power in Elmore tracks with social and economic power. The poorest characters suffer in silence. The richest ones make it rain. Alan Keene, the balloon, is one of the most philosophically interesting background characters in the show. He is relentlessly, perpetually nice. The show addresses this directly in The Saint, where Gumball and Darwin spend the entire episode trying to break him, subjecting him to increasingly terrible treatment to find the point where his niceness cracks. He doesn't crack. He remains nice through everything. Then the traitor reveals that Alan is, in private, calculating and manipulative. The niceness is a performance. He understands the rules of Elmore well enough to know that being the nice character is a role that protects him from being deemed useless or boring, and he maintains it strategically. Behind the helium-pitched sweetness is someone who has figured out the game and decided that playing the Saint is his best survival strategy. Alan's girlfriend Carmen is a cactus. Their relationship is literally painful. Every time they touch, there's a chance she punctures him. They're a couple whose love is structurally incompatible with physical proximity. The show plays this for physical comedy. It also, without making a big point of it, presents them as choosing each other anyway. Carmen and Alan love each other knowing that being close will sometimes hurt. That's a choice. It's one the show respects. Penny and Gumball's relationship deserves more than the few lines it gets in the character section. The slow burn across 2.5 seasons is handled with enough specific detail and enough genuine emotional awkwardness that it lands as something like a real experience of young romantic feeling. The inability to say what you mean, the moments where something almost gets said and then doesn't. The way mutual awareness of feelings can coexist with the complete inability to act on them for reasons that seem very important in the moment and very small in retrospect. When Gumball finally tells Penny how he feels, in The Shell, under extreme circumstances, in the middle of her transforming crisis, it's not a grand romantic speech. It's a simple statement. He likes her. He likes her face, whatever that face happens to be at the given moment. He isn't making a declaration about her potential or her eventual settled form. He's accepting her current state, whatever it is, as the thing he's drawn to. The specificity of that, not "I'll love you when you figure yourself out," but "I like you right now as whatever you're being right now," is what makes the moment feel real. Their relationship in seasons 4 through 6, once they're actually a couple, has its own interesting texture. Penny serves as the voice of reason in many of their shared scenes, which is a familiar dynamic. But the show also lets her have her own emotional volatility. Her shape-shifting means her inner states are literally visible, and there are episodes where her transformation into less appealing forms during arguments becomes its own kind of communication. She can't pretend to be fine when she's not. The relationship exists in a physical vocabulary of honesty that Gumball doesn't always match. The fact that Teresa Gallagher voices both Penny and Nicole, Gumball's girlfriend and Gumball's mother, is genuinely strange the more you think about it. It's not possible that this was accidental. The casting director and production team would have been aware. Whether it's a Freudian joke baked into the casting, a practical decision that became an interesting detail, or something else entirely has never been addressed by the creative team in any interview I'm aware of. It sits there as a fact, generating its own low-level strangeness in the background of every scene where either character speaks. Ocho, the 8-bit spider, has been consistently read by fans as representing a character from a dead visual language. 8-bit pixel art being the aesthetic of early arcade and home console games, which has been superseded by a more sophisticated rendering in the decades since. He looks like he belongs to a media that the world has moved on from. And he's extremely angry a lot of the time. Clayton, the shapeshifter, lies constantly. He assumes different identities, different forms, different stories. The show's reading of Clayton is that he lies because he doesn't know who he is without a story to inhabit. Each lie is an attempt to be someone, because being himself doesn't feel like enough. He's the identity crisis character, the one who builds new realities daily because the truth about his own is something he can't face. Miss Simeon's age, 2 million years, is stated directly in the show, in The Ape, and other episodes. 2 million years means she predates the earliest recognized members of Homo sapiens by a significant margin. She predates agriculture, writing, civilization, and essentially all of recorded history. And she's teaching middle school. The character's defining tragedy isn't just that she's been doing this for a long time, it's that she's been doing it since before the concept of a long time had any human reference point. The show's crossover with Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared, the puppets, one of the most unusual collaborations in animation history. Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared is a deeply unsettling British web series about creativity, control, and the psychological manipulation embedded in children's educational media. It uses physical felt puppets to tell stories that are deliberately disturbing under a veneer of cheerful children's television aesthetics. Having Gumball cross into that world, with real physical puppets built in the show's style, is an audacious creative choice that works because both shows share a fundamental understanding. Children's entertainment is not innocent, and the conventions of the genre carry meaning that children and adults alike absorb without being fully aware of it. The episode of Gumball titled The Question is one of the show's most internally philosophical. Darwin, at a point of existential crisis about what the purpose of life is, goes through the episode asking everyone they encounter. Every answer is different. Every answer is wrong in some way. The episode ends without a satisfying resolution, because the show is honest about the fact that there isn't one. Life doesn't have a universally agreed upon purpose. You find one, or you make one, or you go insane looking. The episode presents this as bleak and also as strangely liberating. The Gumball Chronicles miniseries, which aired in 2020, was written and directed by Richard Overall, the show's voice director and picture editor. It consists mostly of clips from previous episodes stitched into new contexts, but includes some original footage. The 4-part Vote Gumball storyline within the miniseries was built around the 2020 U.S. presidential election, with Gumball running for school president. The show's commentary on political media and democratic process was reasonably sharp for a children's clip show. Darwin's Yearbook, the other 2019 miniseries, has Darwin trying to assemble the Elmore Junior High yearbook and deciding who deserves various superlatives. It's a character-by-character survey of the supporting cast, using mostly clips but framing them with enough new material to create something that functions as a genuine piece of content rather than pure recycling. The show's music was handled by different composers across different seasons and contexts. The main theme is one of the most recognizable pieces of music in recent children's television. That opening riff over the title card is immediately identifiable to anyone who spent time watching Cartoon Network in the 2010s. The show also frequently uses original songs within episodes, and several of these are genuinely excellent as standalone pieces. Oh Be Careful Darwin, from the episode The Catfish, is a memorable example of the show's ability to make a comedic song that's also a little emotionally resonant. The episode The Singing, which is essentially a musical episode framed around the convention of everyone inexplicably bursting into song, is the show doing musical theater for 11 minutes and doing it with enough commitment that it works as a piece of musical parody and also as a genuine musical. It includes a moment where characters explicitly acknowledge that the bursting into song thing is weird, and they can't explain why it keeps happening, which is the show's meta-humor, applying to even its own formal experiments. The episode The Bumpkin, which focuses on Idaho, gives the sentient potato a bit more depth than most episodes bother to. Idaho's family runs a farm. There's a sequence where the show visits the farm and you see the broader context of Idaho's existence. Other potatoes, agricultural land, the fundamental vulnerability of being made of the same material that people eat. The show never makes this explicit or heavy. It just shows Idaho's world and lets the implications sit there. Hector Jotunheim's name is a Norse mythology reference. Jotunheim is one of the 9 worlds in Norse cosmology, specifically the realm of the giants. The creators named the giant child after the realm of giants, which is a small piece of world building through etymology that most viewers probably never consciously notice, but which adds a layer of intention to what might otherwise feel like a random visual gag. The character of Hot Dog Guy is a one-episode focus character who developed an unexpected amount of fandom around him. He's exactly what his name suggests, an anthropomorphic hot dog in a bun. He appears in the background of many episodes before The Awkwardness, which reveals that he and Gumball have an inexplicably awkward relationship whenever they encounter each other. Neither can explain it. The episode is built around them trying to figure out what the source of the awkwardness is and never successfully resolving it. The episode works as an absurdist study of social discomfort that has no rational explanation and no resolution. Sarah G. Lotto, the fangirl character, is in some ways the show's most interesting meta-character after Rob. She's a self-aware fan within the universe. She writes stories about Gumball and Darwin. She follows them around. She documents their adventures. She inserts herself into their narrative. She is the audience given physical form within the story. The person who's watching an engagement gives meaning to what she watches. The show is ambivalent about her in a way that mirrors the ambivalence most creative works have about their fan bases. They need her attention to survive, but her obsession also has dimensions that are uncomfortable. She's both a salvation and a kind of possession. Without viewers like Sarah, Elmore doesn't exist. With viewers like Sarah, the characters never quite belong to themselves. Section 12. A gentle close at the end of the night. By now, wherever you are and whatever time it is, the world outside should feel very far away. That's what this kind of thing is for. Not escapism exactly, more like perspective. A reminder that there are worlds built from love and imagination and the careful accumulation of details, and that spending time in those worlds is a legitimate use of your hours. Gumball is that kind of world. Ben Bacalé built it from the characters nobody wanted, set in streets he photographed himself, and named the family after people he loved and a creator he admired. He spent years building up a mythology that most viewers didn't even notice was being built, layer by layer, season by season, until the whole thing revealed itself as something that was always heading somewhere specific. The show ran from May 9th, 2011 to June 24th, 2019. 8 years, 240 episodes, 6 seasons. And then it ended in static. Not because it ran out of story, but because the story was interrupted. For 6 years after that, Elmore sat at the end of a cliffhanger, incomplete, waiting. And then in July 2025, it came back. The void didn't win. Elmore woke up. Gumball and Darwin found themselves 7 years late for school, the house in ruins. The world changed around them, and the show picked up like it had never stopped. Because for people who genuinely love this show, it never quite stopped. It lived in rewatches and fan theories and analysis videos and late-night conversations. It persisted in the way things persist when they've genuinely mattered to people. There's something in that persistence that the show would recognize. The whole philosophy of Elmore, the whole logic of the void, is built on the idea that being watched and remembered and cared about is what keeps things alive. And Gumball was watched and remembered and cared about for 6 years when it was technically over. The audience kept it alive. The signal held because people kept tuning in, even to something that had ended. That's not nothing. That's actually the whole point of the show. The show's central argument, underneath all the comedy, underneath the horror, underneath the meta-awareness, is that existing is worth doing even when the conditions are uncertain. That loving people and being loved by them has value even when those people might forget or change or the world might reset. That showing up fully as yourself, even in a world that might not be real, is the thing that makes it real enough. Rob gave up his chance at friendship to fix the damage he'd caused, and nobody remembered. Nicole carries a childhood she didn't choose and shows up every day and loves her children with everything she has. Darwin crossed a city on brand new legs to get back to a family that barely knew him as a fish. Penny took off her shell in a world that called her a monster and stayed out of it because one person told her the truth. Larry works 38 jobs at $7 an hour because the alternative is stopping. And stopping has always felt like the edge of oblivion. They're all doing the same thing. They're holding on, they're showing up, They're staying in the world, doing what they can with what they have. And somewhere in London right now, there's a street that looks almost exactly like Elmore. The sun is at that specific angle that makes a suburban sidewalk look like it's expecting something to happen on it. And in another version of things, a blue cat and a goldfish are late for school, and their mother is at work at the rainbow factory, and their father is asleep on the couch, and the world they live in is held together by the combined weight of everyone refusing to stop. And so are you. In the dark, wherever you are tonight, in whatever room or car or patch of quiet you found you're here. You chose to be here. To spend this time inside something that matters to someone who made it, and to let it matter to you a little too. That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing. The signal is holding. The static is quiet. Elmore is still out there, causing chaos, being absurd, asking impossible questions, and somehow, and probably stubbornly, being exactly enough. Gumball and Darwin will wake up tomorrow and cause chaos all over again. Larry will be at every store. Miss Simeon will have been teaching for 2,000,001 years. And Banana Barbara will be in her garage painting something she might not be able to show anyone, in colors that might not have words yet. The void hasn't won. The show isn't over. Sleep well. Thank you for staying. And if this is your kind of channel, if you liked spending a few hours in Elmore, wandering through the details and the stories and the quiet, strange facts, you know what to do. Like this video. Subscribe if you haven't already. And leave me a comment wherever you are and whatever time it is when you hear this. I want to know. I read every single one. This has been Watterson Lore. I'll be here when you wake up. Good night. A final wander. What the show understood about being a show. There's one more thing I want to say before we close. It's about the show's relationship to children's television as a genre, and what makes Gumball unusual within it. Most children's shows are built on a simple contract. They will be safe. Safe in the sense that nothing in them will genuinely disturb a child. Safe in the sense that the emotions they engage are manageable, the stakes are clear, and the endings are reassuring. That safety is a feature, not a limitation. Children need places where the world is predictable and kind, and a good children's show provides that. Gumball doesn't quite make that contract. It makes a different one, it will be honest. It will be honest about the fact that some things are confusing, some feelings don't resolve, some situations don't have answers, and some characters carry weight that can't be put down. It will do all of this through comedy, so the experience of encountering these things feels bearable rather than overwhelming. But it won't pretend the things aren't there. That's an unusual choice, and it's the choice that makes the show speak to adults as genuinely as it speaks to children. Children who grow up watching Gumball and then rewatch it as teenagers and young adults find not a nostalgic artifact from simpler times, but a show that had always been engaging with the complicated stuff. The darkness that becomes visible in adulthood was always there. It was just present at a level the child viewer absorbed without fully articulating. This is what the best children's entertainment does. It works at multiple levels simultaneously, and each level is genuinely valuable for the audience at that stage of life. The child gets the funny blue cat and the chaos. The teenager gets the meta-awareness and the existential anxiety. The adult gets the character studies and the philosophical framework. And the show holds all of those readings at once without collapsing under their weight. Ben Bacalé achieved something genuinely rare. He made a show that began with rejected characters and the premise that things which aren't good enough get forgotten, and then spent 6 seasons making those characters unforgettable. He made a show about the fear of not mattering that mattered enormously to an enormous number of people. The most successful possible argument against its own central premise. And there's a version of this story that's worth telling you one more time, in the simplest possible terms, before we close. A man spent years drawing characters for advertisements that nobody wanted. Each time a pitch failed, the character he'd drawn went into a folder. He was building a collection of things that had been deemed insufficient. And then one day, he looked at the folder, and instead of seeing a record of failure, he saw the raw material for something new. He took all those unwanted things and made them a home. He built them a world. He gave them families and relationships and stories, and the chance, for the first time, to be central rather than background. He called the show about what happens when unwanted things find each other, and it turned out to be one of the most loved children's shows in animation history. I want to leave you with one final image. There's a piece of early development art from the show that was shared publicly, promotional sketches made before the series started production, and in that art, Gumball looks slightly different. His eyes are bigger, his proportions are less settled. He looks like a character who isn't quite sure what he is yet, who's still in the process of becoming himself. That version of Gumball never made it to air. He was revised into the version we know, but he's still in the archive somewhere, a version of the main character that existed before anyone saw the show, before it won any awards, before anyone had any reason to know his name. And I think about that image sometimes, the early Gumball, the one who didn't quite know what he was yet. And I think about how much he has in common with everyone who's ever been at the beginning of something uncertain and felt unfinished. The show about rejected characters turned out to be one of the most accepted things in children's animation. The early sketches that didn't quite know what they were became a character millions of people recognize instantly. Something incomplete became something complete. That trajectory, from uncertain to established, from rejected to beloved, from not quite right to exactly right, is the trajectory of everything worth making. And it's worth holding on to. And that's worth holding on to on your way to sleep, wherever you are right now. The things that worry about not being good enough are often the ones that end up meaning the most. The rejected characters found their home. The show about forgetting is one people won't stop remembering. Elmore is still out there, the signal holds, the static stays at bay. Sleep well. Good night.